Say the name out loud. Lucifer. Something happens when you say it. In a church, people shift in their seats. In a horror movie, the music changes. On the internet, it starts arguments that never end. You do not need to be religious to feel it. You do not need to believe in anything at all. The name carries weight that most names never accumulate in 1,000 years. Everyone knows Lucifer, the most beautiful angel in heaven, the one who rebelled, the one who fell, the one who became Satan, the devil, the serpent, the dragon, the face of everything wrong with the universe. Everyone knows the story. Here is the thing. Most of what people know did not come from where they think it came from. It came from a 4th century Latin translation of a single Hebrew poem. It came from a 13th century Italian poet walking through an imaginary hell. It came from a blind English poet dictating verses in a small room after his political dreams had collapsed. It came from romantic painters and heavy metal album covers and a television show where Lucifer runs a nightclub in Los Angeles and helps the LAPD solve murders. The story most people carry is real. It is just not old. It was built, slowly, across 2,000 years, by people asking the same question every generation asks when they look at the world and see something gone terribly wrong. Where did evil come from? And does it have a name? Open the Bible and look for Lucifer. Really look. The name appears exactly once in the King James Version. In a single verse in the book of Isaiah. In what scholars identify as a taunt song directed at a dead Babylonian king. In most modern translations, the word Lucifer does not appear at all. It has been replaced by what the Hebrew actually says, morning star, or son of the dawn. That is not a conspiracy. That is a translation. And that translation, made by a scholar named Jerome in the late 300s, set in motion one of the most extraordinary journeys any name has ever taken through human history. This is the story of that journey. It begins not with a monster. It begins with a star, rising before dawn over the city of Babylon, bright enough to cast shadows, beautiful enough to stop a person in their tracks. Gone the moment the real light arrives. It begins with something that looked like it could have been the sun, but was not. Picture the oldest map you have ever seen. Not a modern map with clean borders and labeled countries. An ancient one, where the edges trail off into blank space and someone has written there, at the margins, the Latin words that translate to "here be dragons." The Bible's earliest picture of evil looks something like that. There are shadows at the edges. There are things that resist the good order of creation. There are hostile forces. Chaos, waters, enemies, and a very crafty serpent in a garden. But there is no single figure standing at the center of it all, with a name and a biography and a clear job title. That figure came later. Understanding how he arrived, and why it took as long as it did, is where this story actually begins. The Hebrew Bible, what Christians call the Old Testament, spans roughly 1,000 years of writing. It contains law and poetry and prophecy and history and wisdom literature. It was produced by dozens of writers across dozens of generations, in different cities, under different kings, in circumstances ranging from royal comfort to Babylonian exile. These writers did not sit down together and agree on a single theology of evil before they started. They wrote what they saw. They wrote what they believed. And what they saw and believed about the nature of evil was more varied and more interesting than most people realize. In Genesis, evil enters the story as a serpent. The text calls it the most crafty of all the wild animals that the Lord God had made. It does not call it Satan. It does not call it a fallen angel. It calls it an animal, a very smart one, but an animal. In Exodus and the historical books, evil is most often located in human hearts and human choices. Pharaoh hardens his heart. Kings lead their people into idolatry. Individuals lie, steal, murder, and justify it all. The catastrophes that befall Israel are traced, again and again, not to a cosmic adversary pulling strings, but to the accumulated weight of human decisions made in the wrong direction. In the Psalms, evil shows up as chaos, as enemious, as the crushing weight of suffering that makes a person cry out at 3 a.m, wondering if anyone is listening. In the prophets, evil is umpire. It is Assyria and Babylon and Egypt, systems of power that devour the vulnerable and call themselves divine. The word that eventually becomes Satan in English appears in the Hebrew text as ha-Satan, with the definite article. The article matters. In Hebrew, using the before, a noun turns it from a proper name into a description of a role or function. Ha-Satan means the adversary or the accuser, the same way the prosecutor describes a courtroom role rather than a specific individual. In several places in the Old Testament, the word appears to refer to human adversaries, not supernatural ones. In Numbers, the angel of the Lord stands in the road as a Satan, an adversary, blocking Balaam's path. This is not a minor linguistic detail. It is the foundation of everything that follows. Because if the Satan is initially a role rather than a person, then the story of how that role became a person, how a function became a figure, how an adversary became the adversary, is one of the most important and least told stories in the history of Western religion. That story does not happen in one place or one moment. It happens over centuries, in response to real events and real suffering and real questions that demanded answers. Here is the question that drove it. If the God of Israel is all-powerful and entirely good, and if the world contains genuine evil that cannot be fully explained by human choice alone, then what is the source of that evil? Every civilization that has ever existed has wrestled with this question. The ancient Near Eastern cultures surrounding Israel had their own answers. The Babylonians had Tiamat, the chaos dragon. The Persians, whose empire the Jewish people lived under for generations, had a full dualistic system. Ahura Mazda, the good god, locked in cosmic combat with Angra Mainyu, the evil one. The Jewish writers did not simply copy these systems, but they could not ignore the questions those systems were trying to answer. And over time, particularly in the literature that emerged during and after the Babylonian exile, the answers began to take on new shapes. A figure in the heavenly court, an accusé, a challenger, a being who had been close to God and had, in some way, turned. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. Before we follow that figure through the centuries, we need to get something straight that most people have never stopped to think about. The name Lucifer, the name Satan, the name devil, the word serpent, the image of the dragon. These are not the same word used in different translations of the same passage. They come from different texts, written in different languages, in different centuries, describing what may or may not be the same figure. And the way those separate images were eventually woven into a single biography is itself a story. One of the most consequential acts of theological interpretation in human history. To tell it honestly, we have to start with the words themselves. Here is something that almost nobody tells you in Sunday school. The Bible does not introduce Satan the way a novel introduces its villain. There is no opening chapter where the adversary strides onto the page, fully formed, with a name and a history and a clear statement of his goals. Instead, the figure that Western tradition would eventually call Lucifer arrives in pieces, scattered across more than 1,000 years of writing, in texts that were never originally meant to be read as chapters of the same biography. 4 names, 4 images, 4 different doorways into the same dark room. The first is Satan. In the oldest layers of the Hebrew Bible, this word functions as a title, Not a name, an adversary, an accusé, someone who opposes or challenges. In the book of Job, a figure called the Satan appears in the heavenly court and initiates the testing of a righteous man. In Zechariah, the Satan stands in the divine court to accuse the high priest Joshua. These are not scenes from a horror story. They read more like scenes from a courtroom, with the Satan playing the role of a prosecuting attorney, one who operates within the divine system, not against it. By the time the New Testament was written, something had shifted. The definite article had dropped away. The Satan had become Satan, a proper name, a specific figure with a specific identity and a specific agenda. Jesus addresses Satan directly in the wilderness. Paul warns the churches about Satan's schemes. The shift from role to person had happened somewhere in between. In the centuries between the last Hebrew prophets and the first Christian writings, in a period we will return to shortly. The second name is devil. This word comes from the Greek diabolos, which means slanderer or false accuser, someone who throws accusations across a divide. When the Hebrew scriptures were translated into Greek in the 3rd and 2nd centuries before Christ, the translators often used diabolos to render Hasatan, the adversary. By the time of the New Testament, devil and Satan were being used interchangeably, both pointing to the same figure. The devil tempts Jesus in the desert. The devil is described as a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. The devil holds the power of death. The third name is serpent. In Genesis, the serpent is introduced without backstory. Crafty, yes. Capable of speech, apparently, but the text of Genesis itself never calls the serpent Satan or the devil. It is later Jewish and Christian interpretation that makes the connection. The Book of Wisdom, written in the 1st century before Christ, says through the devil's envy, death entered the world. This is one of the earliest texts to explicitly link the serpent of Eden with the devil, and in Revelation, written at the end of the 1st century of the Common Era, the identification becomes explicit. The great dragon is called that ancient serpent, who is called the devil and Satan. The fourth name is dragon. Revelation is where the imagery explodes into full apocalyptic force. A great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns appears in the sky. He wages war on the woman clothed with the sun. He fights Michael and the angels of heaven, and he loses. When he is cast down, the text names him with a kind of deliberate completeness, as if the writer wants to make absolutely sure there is no ambiguity. The great dragon, that ancient serpent, who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. That sentence, from Revelation 12, verse 9, is the only place in the entire Bible where all of these images are explicitly identified as the same figure. It is the capstone of an interpretive tradition that had been building for centuries. And then there is Lucifer. Lucifer does not appear in Revelation. Lucifer does not appear in the New Testament at all. Lucifer appears once, in Isaiah 14, in a Hebrew poem that was originally written about a dead Babylonian king. The word Lucifer is Latin, not Hebrew. It was introduced into the biblical text by Jerome, a scholar who translated the Hebrew scriptures into Latin in the late 300s. Jerome translated the Hebrew phrase, Hillel ben Shachar, which means shining one, son of the dawn, as Lucifer, which means light-bearer in Latin. Jerome was not wrong to make that translation. Light-bearer is a reasonable rendering of shining one, but the decision to use that specific Latin word in that specific context, in the most widely distributed translation of the Bible in Western history, meant that Lucifer became attached to Isaiah 14 in the minds of millions of Latin-speaking Christians. And Isaiah 14, as we will see, had already been read by many Christian interpreters as a description not just of a Babylonian king, but of a cosmic fall that happened before human history began. Put those two things together, and you have the birth of a name. Not from a single verse that says his name is Lucifer, but from a translation choice, applied to a poem, read through centuries of interpretation, until a word that once meant the morning star became the most famous name for the Prince of Darkness. That is not a conspiracy. That is how meaning works. That is how tradition works. It is slower than a conspiracy, and more interesting, and considerably harder to undo. So, now we have our map. Satan the adversary, devil the slanderer, serpent the ancient deceiver, dragon the apocalyptic enemy, and Lucifer the fallen morning star, the name that does not appear in the Hebrew text, that entered through a Latin translation, and that ended up on the marquee. Each of these names opens a different door into the same story. We are going to open them one by one. Nobody reads Genesis 3 for the first time. That is the strange thing about this story. By the time most people encounter the text itself, they already carry a fully formed picture in their heads. The garden, the woman, the forbidden fruit, the snake coiled around the branch, whispering, and behind the snake, everyone already knows, is the devil, Lucifer in disguise, the fallen angel working his first and most consequential act of sabotage against the human race. That picture is powerful. It is ancient, and it is almost entirely absent from the actual text of Genesis. Read the opening of Genesis 3 slowly, the way you would read something you had never seen before, and notice what the writer chooses to say and what the writer chooses not to say. Now the serpent was more crafty than any other wild animal that the Lord God had made. That is the introduction. One sentence. The serpent is crafty. It is a wild animal, and it was made by the Lord God. No backstory. No explanation of how it learned to speak. No hint that this creature was once something else. Something higher. Something that had fallen from a different and more exalted existence before arriving in this garden with an agenda. The text simply opens a door, and there the serpent is. Already in conversation. Already asking questions. Already doing what it does. Did God actually say, "You shall not eat of any tree in the garden"? The question is perfect. It does not say God lied. It asks whether the woman heard correctly. It introduces doubt, not by making a claim, but by raising a possibility. And the conversation that follows moves with a kind of terrible logic. Each step feeling almost reasonable, until the moment the fruit is eaten and everything changes. What is remarkable, if you are reading carefully, is how little the text of Genesis tells us about the serpent's motivation. It does not say the serpent hates humanity. It does not say the serpent is trying to corrupt the creation. It does not say the serpent is an agent of a cosmic enemy working to undermine the purposes of God. It says the serpent was crafty. It asked a question, and the conversation went the way it went. The restraint is extraordinary. The oldest story in the Western tradition about the entry of evil into the world does not explain evil. It shows it happening. Jewish readers in the centuries before Christ began asking the question that the text does not answer. Who is this serpent? What is it really? The Book of Wisdom, written sometime in the 1st century before the Common Era, offers one of the earliest explicit answers. Through the devil's envy, death entered the world. This is not a quotation from Genesis. This is an interpretation of Genesis, written by a Jewish author who had come to believe that the serpent in the garden was not simply a clever animal, but an agent of something malevolent, something that could be called the devil. The Book of Jubilees, another Jewish text from roughly the same period, names a figure called Mastema, a kind of adversary who works against humanity. First Enoch develops elaborate stories about fallen heavenly beings who corrupt the earth. None of these texts are in the Standard Bible. But they were read. They were influential. They shaped the mental world into which the New Testament was written. And then Revelation arrives and closes the circle explicitly. The great dragon, that ancient serpent called the devil and Satan, the serpent of Genesis and the dragon of Revelation are declared to be the same figure, the same entity who deceived Eve in the garden and now stands as the cosmic adversary of God's people in the final chapters of history. So the connection is real. It is textual. It is made within Scripture itself. But here is what gets lost when people assume the connection was always obvious. For most of the Old Testament period, the serpent in Genesis was read as a serpent, a remarkable one, a dangerous one, but not automatically as a disguised cosmic rebel with a personal history of war in heaven. That reading developed. It developed in response to real theological pressure, in response to real suffering, in response to the very human need to understand how a good God could have made a world where something like this could happen. The serpent in Genesis is the oldest door into the story of Lucifer. But it is a door that most of the original audience did not know opened onto something larger. They saw a serpent. Later generations saw through it. And what they saw behind it would eventually become one of the most consequential ideas in the history of Western civilization. Here is the thing about Genesis 3 that stays with you once you notice it. The text is not primarily interested in the serpent. It is interested in the humans. The serpent speaks 4 verses and then largely disappears from the story. The rest of Genesis 3 is about Adam and Eve, about what they did and why, about what they lost and how they lost it and what it cost them. The focus is on the choice, a real choice, made by real people, in a real garden, not a mistake, not a misunderstanding, a choice to reach for something that was not theirs, to trust a voice that told them they could be more than they were made to be, to believe that the boundary placed around them was not a gift but a limitation. That choice, and not the serpent's identity, is what Genesis wants you to carry out of the garden. The serpent is the occasion. The choice is the story. And in the centuries of interpretation that followed, something interesting happened. The serpent's identity became more and more elaborated, more and more cosmic, more and more connected to a vast backstory of heavenly rebellion and cosmic war. And the more that happened, the easier it became to locate the source of evil somewhere outside the human heart. Out there, in the serpent, in the devil, in Lucifer. That tension between a story that points outward at a cosmic adversary and a story that points inward at a human choice runs through everything that follows. Genesis planted both seeds. The tradition watered them differently in different centuries. We are still sorting out which is which. But before we follow the serpent's identity further into Jewish and Christian interpretation, we need to visit the one scene in the entire Old Testament that shows us the adversary figure most clearly, in the most detail, doing what he does. It is not in Genesis. It is in the opening chapters of a book about a man named Job, who had done nothing wrong, and who was about to have everything taken from him as part of a conversation he was not invited to. There is a scene at the beginning of Job that most people skip over on their way to the suffering. It is a mistake to skip it. The book of Job opens not on earth, but in heaven. The sons of God are presenting themselves before the Lord. The phrase suggests a kind of divine assembly, a gathering of heavenly beings in the presence of God. We are not given a description of what this looks like. We are not told how many beings are there, or what they look like, or how they arrived. We are simply dropped into the middle of it, the way you might walk into a meeting that has already started and have to piece together what is being discussed. Among those presenting themselves is a figure the text calls the Satan, the adversary, and God speaks to him directly. Where have you come from? From roaming through the earth and walking up and down on it. That answer is worth sitting with. The Satan has been on earth, observing, moving through the human world. And when God asks where he has been, he gives an answer that is almost casual. Roaming, walking up and down, as if the earth is territory he knows well and moves through freely. God then raises the subject of Job. Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one like him on the earth. He is blameless and upright. He fears God and turns away from evil. And the Satan responds not with an attack but with a question. Does Job fear God for nothing? It is one of the most important questions in the Bible, not because it is asked by a villain, but because it is a real question, a hard question, the kind of question that cuts to the bone of what religious devotion actually is and what it is worth. The Satan's argument is this: Job is faithful because faithfulness pays. God has blessed him. God has put a hedge around him. God has made his life go well. Of course, Job worships God. God has made it worth his while. Take away the blessings and watch what happens. You will find out what Job's faith is really made of. This is not an argument made by someone who hates Job. It is an argument made by someone who is deeply skeptical about human nature, about whether genuine devotion is possible when things are going well, about whether any creature would serve God if there were nothing in it for them. It is, in its way, one of the most honest and most devastating questions ever posed. God gives the Satan permission to test Job. First his possessions, then his health, and Job, stripped of everything, sits in the ashes and refuses to curse God. His wife tells him to do it and get it over with. His friends arrive and deliver long speeches explaining exactly why this suffering is his own fault. Job argues back. Job question. Job demands an audience with God. And eventually, at the end of the book, God speaks. But here is what does not happen at the end of the book. The Satan does not appear again. He raises the question. He conducts the test. And then he vanishes from the narrative. Job never knows about the heavenly conversation. Job never learns that his suffering was the result of a cosmic wager. The Satan who initiated everything is never addressed again. Never punished. Never explained. The book is not interested in giving us a complete picture of the adversary. It is interested in Job, in what Job does with suffering he does not understand, cannot explain, and was not warned about. But the heavenly court scene tells us something important about how the adversary figure was understood in this period. He is not outside the divine order. He operates within it. He needs permission to act. He cannot simply reach into a human life and start breaking things. He has to present himself before God and make his case, and receive authorization. This is not the all-powerful Lord of Darkness of later tradition. This is something more limited, and in some ways more interesting. A figure who moves through the world observing human behavior and who has, apparently, developed a very low opinion of human motivation. A figure who believes that no one serves God for nothing. That every act of devotion is ultimately self-interested. That strip away the rewards and the faith evaporates. He may not be wrong about most people. That is what makes him dangerous. In Zechariah 3, the adversary appears again in a similar courtroom setting. The high priest Joshua is standing before the angel of the Lord, and the Satan is standing at his right hand to accuse him. The Lord rebukes the Satan. Joshua is clothed in clean garments. The accusation, whatever it was, is dismissed. Again, the adversary is functioning as a legal opponent, an accuser in a divine proceeding, someone who raises objections, who points to flaws, who demands accountability. And again he is overruled. These two scenes, Job and Zechariah, give us the clearest picture the Old Testament offers of this figure operating in his own right. And what they show is not a rebel who has rejected God's authority. They show a being who is still operating within God's court, still subject to God's decisions, still fundamentally part of a system he has not yet broken with. The figure who will eventually be called Lucifer, the one who wages war in heaven and is cast out forever, the one who reigns in hell and commands legions of demons. That figure is not yet fully visible here. He is emerging. He is taking shape. But the biography is still being written. What changed? What happened between the adversary of Job's courtroom and the dragon of Revelation's war in heaven? Part of the answer lies in history, in amperes, in suffering on a scale that made the testing of one righteous man look like a small and personal thing. Part of the answer lies in 400 years of silence, in the world that Jewish writers inhabited between the last of the Hebrew prophets and the first of the Christian apostles, in a period of intense pressure that forced entirely new questions about the nature of evil and where it comes from. And part of the answer lies in a poem written by the prophet Isaiah about a dead king in Babylon, a poem that used an image so vivid, so cosmic, so perfectly suited to describe the fall of something once brilliant, that later readers could not help but hear in it an echo of something older than any earthly king. A star falling from heaven, a shining one, son of the dawn, cut down to the earth. That poem is where the name Lucifer was born, and the story of how it was born is stranger and more human and more theologically rich than almost anyone realizes. Close your eyes and imagine Babylon at its peak. Not the ruins, not the archaeological site in modern Iraq where tourists walk through dusty foundations and try to picture what once stood there. Imagine it alive, the walls wide enough at the top for two chariots to pass each other without slowing down. The Ishtar Gate covered in glazed blue brick, decorated with golden dragons and bulls, standing at the northern entrance to the city like a declaration that the rest of the world needed to take seriously. The Euphrates River running through the center of it all, crossed by bridges, lined with temples and markets and administrative buildings that stretched further than a person could walk in a single afternoon. At the center of the city, rising in stages toward the sky like a staircase built for gods, stood the great ziggurat. The Babylonians called it Etemenanki. The name translates to something like House of the Foundation of Heaven and Earth, the place where heaven and earth met, the structure that made the theological claim visible to everyone who entered the city. If you want access to the divine, this is where you come. And if you want access to this place, you submit to Babylon. That was the claim. That was the architecture of the empire's self-understanding. Not just the most powerful city in the world, but the axis around which the world turned, the center of everything. Isaiah looked at that claim and wrote a poem. He wrote it as a taunt, a song of mockery to be sung on the day when Babylon finally fell. He addressed it to the king of Babylon directly, to the man who sat at the top of that system and believed, or performed the belief, that his power was divine. The poem is in Isaiah 14, and buried in the middle of it are 12 verses that would be read, argued over, and interpreted for the next 2,500 years. Listen to how it begins. How you have fallen from heaven, morning star, son of the dawn, you have been cast down to the earth, you who once laid low the nations. In Hebrew, the phrase translated as morning star, son of the dawn, is Hillel ben Shachar. Hillel means shining one or brilliant one. Ben Shachar means son of the dawn. Together they evoke the image of Venus, the brightest object in the pre-dawn sky, the light that appears just before sunrise and announces the coming of the day. Isaiah is using that image to describe the king of Babylon at his height. Brilliant, blazing, the most visible thing in the sky, the herald of a new order. Everything pointed toward him. And then the poem describes the fall. 5 times the king speaks, and 5 times he uses the same word. I will ascend to the heavens. I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will sit enthroned on the Mount of Assembly, on the utmost heights of Mount Zaphon. I will ascend above the tops of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. 5 declarations, 5 future tenses, 5 expressions of a will that is entirely focused on its own elevation. There is nothing in these 5 sentences about other people. Nothing about what the king wants to give or build or protect or create. Nothing about the people under his rule or the gods he is supposed to serve or the responsibilities he has been given. 5 sentences entirely about where the self intends to go and what the self intends to become. Isaiah answers those 5 statements with 2 words. But you are brought down to the realm of the dead, to the depths of the pit. The structure of the poem is the structure of the fall itself. Ascent stated 5 times. Descent stated once. Because the descent does not require elaboration. It simply happens. The king who said I will is now in Sheol, the place of the dead. And the kings who are already there rise up to greet him with a kind of dark amusement. You have become weak, as we are. You have become like us. This is Isaiah at his most devastating. The king who wanted to be like the Most High ended up being like everyone else who ever died. The morning star who tried to outshine the sun is lying in the mud. Now here is the crucial thing that most people miss when they read this passage. Isaiah is not writing about Satan. He is writing about a king, a specific, historical, political figure who ruled a specific, historical empire that was doing specific, historical things to specific, historical people, including Isaiah's own people. The taunt song is a political poem. It is the prophet saying, with all the literary power he can command, that the empire that calls itself eternal will end, that the king who calls himself divine will die, that the architecture of Babylonian self-importance, as magnificent as it is, will not outlast the God who made the morning star that Babylon was using as its symbol. The first audience for this poem knew exactly what it was. They heard the name of their oppressor in it. They felt the satisfaction of a prophetic declaration that the tyrant's end was coming. They were not reading a biography of the devil. They were hearing a judgment on an empire. But here is where the story gets interesting. Later readers, reading this poem in different circumstances, with pre-questions pressing on them, heard something more. They noticed that the language Isaiah used exceeded what was strictly necessary to describe even the most arrogant human king. Fallen from heaven, cast down to the earth, you said in your heart, I will ascend to the heavens. The imagery was cosmic. The fall was vertical in a way that suggested more than political defeat. And the pride described, the 5 I wills, sounded less like the boast of one particular Babylonian king and more like the distilled essence of a certain kind of pride that showed up again and again in human history. What if? Those later readers asked. Isaiah was describing something that happened before Babylon. What if the king of Babylon was not the origin of this pattern but an echo of it? What if the pride that destroyed him was a reflection of a pride that had already destroyed something else? Something older and grander and more cosmic. What if there had been a morning star before there was a Babylon? That question, asked by Jewish readers in the centuries before Christ and then by Christian readers in the centuries after, is the engine that drove the interpretation of Isaiah 14 far beyond its original context. It is not a dishonest question. It is a real theological question. If pride is the oldest sin, where did it first appear? If the pattern of ascent and fall is written into the nature of reality, who fell first? The poem did not answer that question, but it gave the question an image, a shining one, son of the dawn, fallen from heaven. Jerome, translating Isaiah into Latin in the late 300s, rendered that image as Lucifer, light-bearer. And once that word entered the Latin Vulgate, the Bible that the Western Church would read for the next 1,000 years, it took on a life that no translator could have fully anticipated. Lucifer in Isaiah 14 became not a description of a Babylonian king's former glory, but the name of the being who fell before all other fallings. The being who had once been heaven's brightest inhabitant. The being whose pride was not a human failing but the original version of which all human pride is a copy. That interpretation was not invented out of nothing. It was built, carefully and over centuries, by people reading real texts and asking real questions. And it produced something that has shaped the Western imagination more deeply than almost any other idea in its history. But the foundation of it, the text that started the whole chain, is still just a poem. A poem about a dead Babylonian king who thought he could climb to heaven and ended up in the dirt. Isaiah was talking about what happens to everything that reaches past its nature. He was talking about pride. And he chose the morning star as his image, because the morning star is the most beautiful thing in the sky at the moment, just before the real light arrives. It shines as if it is the source. It is not the source. And when the sun comes up, it disappears. A few decades after Isaiah wrote his taunt song about Babylon, another prophet was sitting in exile by the rivers of that same Babylon, looking at a different empire and writing a different kind of poem. His name was Ezekiel, and the poem he wrote, addressed to the king of a city called Tyre, contains language so strange and so cosmic that readers have been arguing about what it means ever since. Tyre was a Phoenician city-state on the coast of the Mediterranean. It was not Babylon. It was not an empire of the same scale or ambition, but it was extraordinarily wealthy. Its merchants had built trade networks that stretched across the ancient world. Its king had grown rich and powerful enough to believe that the wealth of Tyre was a reflection of his own wisdom and his own divinity. Ezekiel wrote to that king, and he wrote in a way that, if you read it carefully, stops making sense as a description of a merely human ruler somewhere around the middle of the passage. It begins in a place you would not expect. You are in Eden, the garden of God, not Tyre. Eden. Every precious stone adorned you carnelian, chrysolite and emerald, topaz, onyx and jasper, lapis lazuli, turquoise and beryl. Your settings and mountings were made of gold. The king of Tyre is being described as a being of extraordinary beauty and adornment, clothed in precious stones. Situated in the garden where human history began, you were anointed as a guardian cherub. For so I ordained you. You were on the holy mount of God. You walked among the fiery stones. A guardian cherub. On the holy mount of God, walking among the fiery stones. This is language that does not belong to any earthly king. No human ruler, no matter how wealthy or powerful, was ever anointed as a guardian cherub. No human king walked on the holy mount of God among fiery stones. Ezekiel has moved from political critique into something else entirely. He is using imagery that reaches past the king of Tyre into something older and stranger and more cosmic. And then comes the pivot. You were blameless in your ways from the day you were created until wickedness was found in you. Created, not born, created, and blameless from the day of creation, until something changed. Through your widespread trade you were filled with violence, and you sinned. So I drove you in disgrace from the mount of God, and I expelled you, guardian, cherub, from among the fiery stones. Your heart became proud on account of your beauty, and you corrupted your wisdom because of your splendor. So I threw you to the earth. There it is. The fall, not a political defeat, not a military conquest, but an expulsion from the presence of God, driven in disgrace from the mount of God, thrown to the earth, and the cause is named with a precision that cuts through everything else in the passage. Your heart became proud on account of your beauty. You corrupted your wisdom because of your splendor. The king of Tyre became proud of what he was given. He looked at the beauty that was bestowed on him, and he began to believe that the beauty was the point, that the beauty was his, that a being as magnificent as he was deserved everything the universe had to offer, including the position of a god. He was wrong, and the wrongness cost him everything. Now here is the same question we asked about Isaiah 14. Was Ezekiel writing about a human king, or was he writing about something else? The answer is almost certainly both. Ezekiel was writing about the king of Tyre. The political context is clear. The pride of Tyre's commercial empire, its belief in its own divine status, its exploitation of its wealth and position. These are the things Ezekiel was addressing. The judgment he pronounced was a political and theological judgment on a real city and a real ruler. But the language he chose exceeds the requirements of that address. Created, guardian cherub, holy mount of God, Aden. These are not the normal tools of political prophecy. They are the language of creation and of heaven, of beings that predate any human empire. And Ezekiel used them deliberately. The effect is a kind of double exposure. Looking at the king of Tyre, the reader also sees something behind him, or beneath him, or before him, a figure more ancient, a creature that was, before any king of any city was ever born, present at the garden of God, clothed in beauty, blameless in all its ways, and proud. The early Christian interpreters who read Ezekiel 28 alongside Isaiah 14 saw the connection immediately. Both passages described an exalted being falling because of pride. Both used language that reached past the immediate political target into something cosmic. Both described a fall that sounded less like a military defeat and more like an expulsion from the presence of God. Put them together, and you had the beginning of a story. A being of extraordinary beauty and proximity to God, created in perfection, trusted with a position of honor and responsibility. And then, somewhere in the contemplation of its own magnificence, turning inward, discovering pride, reaching past the role it was given toward the position of the one who gave it. The pattern in Ezekiel is slightly different from Isaiah but points in the same direction. In Isaiah, the pride is about power, the desire to ascend, the 5 I wills reaching toward the throne of the Most High. In Ezekiel, the pride is about beauty, the heart that became proud of what it saw when it looked at itself, the wisdom that was corrupted not by ambition exactly, but by the mirror. You were beautiful. You knew you were beautiful. And somewhere in knowing it, you began to believe that beauty of that magnitude deserved to answer to no one. That is a different shade of the same sin. And it is, if anything, more recognizable, more human. Most people know what it is to receive a gift and begin to believe the gift defines their worth. Most people know what it is to be told they are exceptional and to let that knowledge curdle into something harder and colder than gratitude. The king of Tyre walked that road. In Ezekiel's telling, he is not the first being to have walked it. He is a reflection of something older, something that was beautiful before beauty was a concept, something that was wise before wisdom had a name, something that stood in the garden of God and looked at what it was and decided that what it was entitled it to become something more. Christian interpreters would come to call that something Lucifer. But we are not there yet. We are still in the 6th century before Christ. We are still in the world of prophets and exiles and empires rising and falling. We have 2 poems, Isaiah's and Ezekiel's, that use cosmic language to describe the pride and fall of earthly kings. We have a tradition of reading those poems as pointing to something older than any earthly king. And we have a question that has not yet been answered by anything in the Hebrew Bible. If the pattern of pride and fall points to something that happened before human history, before Babylon, before Tyre, before Eden even, then what happened? Where? When? And to whom? The answer to that question was not going to come quietly. It was going to come out of one of the most violent and traumatic centuries the Jewish people ever experienced. A century when the question of cosmic evil stopped being theoretical and became the most urgent question a people could ask. A century when a king declared himself God made visible and walked into the temple and proved that the distance between divine claims and human atrocity could be crossed in a single afternoon. In the year 167 before the Common Era, a man walked into the temple in Jerusalem and did something that no foreign conqueror had done in 4 centuries. He desecrated it. His name was Antiochus IV, king of the Seleucid Empire, ruler of a territory stretching from modern Turkey to the borders of India. He called himself Epiphanes, God made visible. The title was not humility. It was a program. Antiochus believed, or performed the belief with enough consistency to make the distinction irrelevant, that Greek culture was the highest expression of human civilization, and that the stubborn particularity of Jewish religious practice was an obstacle to the unity his empire required. So he acted. He banned the observance of the Sabbath. He made circumcision a capital offense. He burned the scrolls of the Torah wherever he found them. He sent soldiers into Jewish homes to enforce compliance and kill those who refused. Mothers who had circumcised their sons were executed along with their infants. The babies hung around their necks as a demonstration of what resistance cost. And then he walked into the temple. He moved through the outer courts, past the altar, into the inner sanctuary. He set up an altar to Zeus in the holy place. He sacrificed a pig on it. The act was not accidental or impulsive. It was calculated. Antiochus understood exactly what he was doing and exactly what it meant to the people watching. He was making a statement about whose God was real and whose was a superstition that the modern world had outgrown. The Jewish people called what he did the abomination of desolation. And in the years that followed, as the Maccabean revolt fought back against Antiochus with a ferocity that surprised everyone, including the rebels themselves, Jewish writers began asking a question with a new and desperate urgency. If God is all-powerful and entirely good, and if a human being can walk into the house of God and do what Antiochus just did, then what kind of universe are we living in? Is there a force in this world powerful enough to oppose God's purposes on this scale? Is the suffering of the righteous the result of something more than human wickedness? Is there an adversary, a real one, with real power and real intention, working against God and against God's people in a way that human sin alone cannot explain? Those questions drove an explosion of Jewish theological writing in the 2 centuries before Christ. The writers of this period were not producing casual speculation. They were people who had watched their neighbors die for refusing to eat pork. They had seen the temple desecrated. They had lived through the particular horror of a civilization that called itself enlightened, systematically destroying everything, a people held sacred while calling the destruction progress. They needed answers that matched the scale of what they were experiencing, and the answers they reached for were cosmic. The most influential of these texts, for our story, is First Enoch. It is attributed to Enoch, the figure in Genesis who walked with God and was no more, because God took him. The book claims to record what Enoch saw when God took him: the heavens he visited, the angels he encountered, the secrets of the universe revealed to him in the presence of God. At the center of First Enoch is a story about a group of heavenly beings called the Watchers. These were angels assigned to observe and guide humanity. But some of them, looking down from heaven at the daughters of men and finding them beautiful, made a decision. They descended. They took human wives. They taught humanity things it was not supposed to know: the making of weapons, the art of deception, the secrets of sorcery. Their offspring, the Nephilim, were giants who consumed everything around them and filled the earth with violence. The leader of the rebel Watchers is a figure named Semyaza. Another figure named Azazel teaches humanity the arts of war and corruption, and the consequences are catastrophic. The earth fills with suffering. The righteous cry out. The archangels bring the situation before God and receive authorization to act. What First Enoch gave the Jewish theological imagination was something the earlier texts had not quite provided: a story, a narrative of heavenly beings who chose to step outside the role they were given and who did damage to the creation as a result. Not a metaphor, not a political poem read as cosmic allegory. A story. with characters and choices and consequences, that located the origin of evil, not in human wickedness, and not in the abstract sovereignty of God, but in the decision of powerful beings to reach for something they were not given. The echo of Isaiah 14 is unmistakable. Stars abandoning their appointed positions in heaven, brilliant beings descending when they should have remained above. The same movement, the same reaching past the given toward the ungiven, appearing now not in a political poem, but in a narrative about heavenly rebellion. Other texts of the same period pushed further. The Book of Jubilees developed the figure of Mastema, a chief of spirits given authority over a portion of the fallen angels, allowed to use them as instruments to lead humanity astray. The Damascus document from the community at Qumran described Belial, a figure of cosmic evil, the ruler of darkness, the commander of an army of spirits set against the children of light. The war scroll from the same community imagined a final cosmic battle between these two forces. Light against darkness, God's army against Belial's. A conflict that would resolve the question of evil once and for all. These texts were not fringe productions. They were read widely, taken seriously, and carried enormous influence over the Jewish communities that preserved them. The people who wrote the New Testament grew up in a world shaped by these ideas. When Jesus talked about Satan, when Paul warned about the schemes of the devil, when John described the dragon in Revelation, they were not introducing foreign concepts to their audiences. They were speaking a language their audiences already knew. The Satan of the New Testament is recognizably continuous with the figures developed in the 4 centuries before Christ. He has real power. He has a domain. He commands subordinates. He operates with a strategy and an intention directed against God's purposes. He is not the relatively contained accuser of Job's heavenly court who needs divine permission before he can touch a righteous man. He is something that has been developing across 400 years of suffering and reflection and desperate theological creativity. He is the answer that a people under Antiochus needed, not because they invented him, but because the pressures of their historical moment forced them to read the scattered images in their scriptures, the serpent, the accuser, the fallen morning star, the expelled guardian cherub, and ask whether those images were pointing to something unified, something real, something that explained why the world kept producing Antiochuses, why brilliance kept turning into atrocity, why the most dangerous tyrants were always the ones who believed most completely in their own divine mandate, why the 5 I wills of Isaiah's Babylonian king sounded 4 centuries later, exactly like the program of a Greek king who called himself God, made visible and sacrificed a pig on the altar of the Lord. The pattern was the same. The pride was the same. The reaching past the given toward the ungiven was the same. And the writers of the Second Temple period looked at that pattern and concluded that it did not originate with Antiochus. It did not originate with Nebuchadnezzar. It did not originate with any human king who had ever lived. It originated somewhere else, somewhere earlier, in a being whose fall set the pattern that every subsequent pride was following, consciously or not, toward the same destination. The name for that being was still being worked out when the New Testament was written, but the shape of him was clear, brilliant, beautiful, powerful, given a position of extraordinary proximity to God, and reaching, always reaching, past what was given toward what was not given, past the roll toward the throne, past the light toward the source. The Jewish writers who lived through Antiochus did not solve the problem of evil. No one has solved the problem of evil, but they gave the Western imagination something it needed to keep asking the question honestly. They gave it a name for the pattern. And when Jesus stood in Galilee and said he saw Satan fall from heaven like lightning, he was speaking to people who had been waiting 400 years for someone to tell them that the pattern had met its match, that the one who set the template for every tyrant who ever called himself divine had already been defeated, that the fall they had been waiting to see had already happened, and that the morning star, for all its brightness, had already given way to something it could not outshine. Every clear morning, if you are awake early enough, you can see it. It appears in the east before the sun, brighter than anything else in the sky, bright enough to cast a faint shadow on a white surface, bright enough to make a person stop and look. The ancients watched it with the same attention we give to almost nothing in the natural world anymore. They knew its cycles. They knew when it would appear and when it would vanish. They knew that it was the herald of the coming day, the signal that the sun was not far behind. The Greeks called it phosphorus, the light bringer, the one who carries the dawn. The Romans called it Lucifer, the same meaning. In Latin, light bearer. It was Venus, not a star at all, despite being called one, but the second planet from the sun, reflecting sunlight so efficiently that at its brightest it outshines everything in the night sky except the moon. The ancient world did not always know this. They knew only that it was the brightest thing, that it appeared before the sun, and that it was beautiful. In the classical mythology of Greece and Rome, Lucifer as a figure was remarkably undeveloped. He was the personification of the morning star, a son of the dawn. But unlike Apollo or Hermes or the other divine figures of the classical world, Lucifer had almost no mythology of his own, no stories of adventures or conflicts or loves or transformations. He was simply there, in the sky, before the sun rose, and then gone. The image, not the mythology, is what carried the weight. And the image carried weight because of what it suggested. A light that appears in the darkness. A brilliance that announces something greater than itself. The most glorious thing in the sky at the moment before the real glory arrives. There is a word for a phenomenon like that. A word that the theological tradition would eventually apply to it with considerable precision. Derivative. The morning star does not generate its own light. It reflects the light of the sun. Its brilliance is real. But it is borrowed brilliance. It shines because something else is shining. And when the source of that borrowed light rises above the horizon, the morning star, for all its brightness, simply disappears. Jerome translated the Hebrew Hillel ben Shachar as Lucifer in the late 300s of the Common Era. He was producing the Latin Vulgate, the translation of the Bible that would become the standard text of Western Christianity for the next 1,000 years. When he came to Isaiah 14 verse 12 and encountered the Hebrew phrase meaning shining one, son of the dawn, he reached for the most natural Latin equivalent, Lucifer, light bearer, morning star. It was, as a translation decision, entirely defensible. Hillel does mean something like shining or brilliant. Ben Shachar does mean son of the dawn. And Lucifer in classical Latin carried exactly those associations. Jerome was not mistaken. He was not making a theological argument with his word choice. He was translating. But translation is never purely neutral. Every word choice carries freight. And Lucifer, placed in the context of Isaiah 14, which by Jerome's time was already being read by many Christian interpreters as a description of a cosmic fall rather than a political taunt, accumulated freight at a remarkable rate. Origen, the great Christian theologian of the 3rd century, had already read Isaiah 14 as referring to the fall of the devil. Tertullian, slightly earlier, had made the same connection. By the time Jerome was working on the Vulgate, the interpretive tradition that saw Isaiah 14 as cosmic rather than purely political was well established. Jerome himself understood the passage that way. So when he wrote Lucifer in that verse, he was not just translating a Hebrew word, he was giving a name to a figure that his theological tradition already recognized. The being who had been in heaven, the being who had fallen, the being whose pride had carried him from the highest position any creature occupied to the lowest point in the universe. Lucifer. The name spread through the Western Church with the Vulgate. Latin was the language of Christian theology, of liturgy, of theological education for the next 1,000 years. Every theologian who read Isaiah 14 in Latin read it with that word in place. Every sermon preached from that text in the medieval church used that name. Every depiction of the fall of the angels in medieval art inherited the name from the text. And something happened to the name as it traveled through that tradition. It stopped being a translation and became an identity. It stopped being a description of the morning star's borrowed brightness and became the name of a specific being with a specific history. The light-bearer became the fallen light, the morning star who fell from its position of brightness. The most beautiful name became the most feared one. There is something worth pausing over here. Something that the tradition itself noticed, and that the best theological minds in that tradition took seriously. The name means light, not darkness, light. The one who would become the symbol of everything dark and destructive in the universe was named for brightness, for the most beautiful object in the morning sky, for the function of announcing something greater than yourself. That is not an accident of translation. That is, if you read the tradition carefully, the whole point. The most dangerous thing in the universe is not the thing that looks evil from the beginning. It is the thing that began as light. That was genuinely bright. That was genuinely beautiful. That reflected something real and something true, and that somewhere in the contemplation of its own brightness forgot that it was reflecting rather than radiating. The morning star is not the sun, but it is bright enough, in the right conditions, to be mistaken for the sun. That is what makes it the perfect image for what the tradition is trying to describe. Something beautiful, something that looks like what it is not, something bright enough to make you stop and look, right up until the moment you realize it is only bright because it has been standing in someone else's light all along. Augustine, writing in the early 5th century, would press this image into one of the sharpest theological formulations in the Christian tradition. Pride, he argued, is not the desire for something evil. It is the perversion of something good. It is love turned inward. It is beauty admiring itself until the admiration becomes an end rather than a response. It is the creature forgetting, or refusing to acknowledge, that what it has was given to it. The morning star that became Lucifer is Augustine's image made visible, a light that forgot the sun, a brightness that began to believe in itself, a herald that wanted to stop announcing and start being announced. Before we leave this image, one more thing is worth noting. In the last chapter of the Bible, in Revelation 22, Jesus speaks, and what he says about himself includes this: I am the root and the offspring of David, and the bright morning star. The bright morning star, the same image, the same words, used in Isaiah 14 of the one who fell, and used in Revelation 22 of the one who overcame. Two morning stars, one that grasped, one that gave, one that looked at its own light and said, I will make myself like the Most High. One that said, in the garden the night before his death, not my will but yours. The image belongs to both, but they are not the same thing. And the difference between them is not a difference of brightness or beauty or position or power. It is a difference of direction. One turned inward, one poured outward. That difference, between the morning star that became darkness and the morning star that became the light of the world, is the theological spine of everything the tradition built around the name Lucifer. And it was always there, waiting, in the image itself. All Jerome did was write it down. The 72 came back excited. You can hear it in the text. They had been sent out in pairs, ahead of Jesus, into every town and place he was about to visit. They had gone with instructions that sounded almost impossible. Carry no money bag, no knapsack, no sandals, greet no one on the road, eat what is set before you, heal the sick, Tell them the kingdom of God has come near. And it had worked. They returned with joy, which is the word Luke uses. And the joy is specific. Lord, even the demons submit to us in your name. They had expected resistance. They had expected the kind of spiritual opposition that would require everything they had. Instead, they found that the name of Jesus, spoken in the moment of confrontation, was enough. The demons left. The sick were healed. The towns they walked through were changed by their passing. They were astonished by their own effectiveness. And Jesus, hearing their report, said something that stopped the conversation. I saw Satan fall from heaven like a flash of lightning. One sentence, past tense. No explanation. No elaboration. He said it and moved on, adding instructions about the authority he was giving them and a caution about where to locate their joy. That sentence has been turning in the minds of readers ever since. What did he mean? The most straightforward reading connects the statement to the moment at hand. The disciples have just returned, reporting that demons submitted to them. Jesus responds by saying that he was watching, that he saw the cosmic significance of what they were doing, that the ministry they were participating in represented a real defeat for the adversary. Satan fell like lightning, fast and total, as the kingdom of God advanced through the Galilean countryside in the hands of 72 ordinary people doing extraordinary things. That reading is coherent. It takes the past tense as a kind of prophetic past, a completed action seen from the perspective of its inevitability. Satan has fallen because the kingdom of God has come near, and the coming near of the kingdom is itself the fall of the adversary. But other readers have heard something different in those words, something older, a reference not to what was happening in Galilee in the first century, but to something that happened before Galilee, before the first century, before the Roman Empire and the Babylonian Empire and everything that human history records. I saw Satan fall from heaven. Past tense. As in, I was there. As in, this happened, and I watched it happen. And I am telling you about it now because what you just experienced in those towns is connected to what I saw then. The authority you exercised is not a new thing. It is the expression of a victory that was already won, or already beginning, or already inevitable. From a moment so far back that only the one who was present at the creation of everything could claim to have witnessed it. John's Gospel adds another layer. In chapter 12, as the crucifixion draws near, Jesus says, "Now is the judgment of this world. Now the ruler of this world will be driven out." The ruler of this world. That phrase locates Satan not in some distant cosmic realm, but in this world, the one we inhabit, the one where empires rise, and the innocent suffer, and the religious establishment makes deals with Roman governors. The ruler of this world has a stake in what happens in Jerusalem in the next few days, and he is about to be driven out. Paul, writing to the Corinthians, uses similar language. The God of this age has blinded the minds of unbelievers. To the Ephesians he writes about the ruler of the kingdom of the air, the Spirit who is now at work in those who are disobedient. The New Testament writers share a sense that the adversary is not simply a figure from ancient mythology. He is operational. He is active. He has real influence over real events in the real world they are living in. And yet, none of them slow down to give him a biography. This is one of the most striking things about the New Testament's treatment of Satan. Given how fully developed the picture of him would become in later tradition, Jesus speaks about him with the familiarity of someone who knows exactly what he is dealing with. He speaks of him as the father of lies, as a murderer from the beginning, as the one who tempts and accuses and opposes. But Jesus never sits his disciples down and says, "Here is the story of how Satan came to be. Here is what happened in heaven before the world began. Here is his name and his history and the account of his rebellion." He assumes they know, at some level, what they need to know. Or perhaps he assumes that the biography is not the point. In the Gospel of Luke, Immediately after telling the disciples, he saw Satan fall like lightning. Jesus says something that most readers rush past on their way to the dramatic image. Do not rejoice that the spirits submit to you, but rejoice that your names are written in heaven. The fall of Satan is not where Jesus wants their attention to rest. He points to it, and then he redirects. Not the adversary's defeat. Your belonging, not the enemy's fall. Your names, written in a place where they cannot be erased. That redirection is itself a theological statement. The story of Satan matters. The fall of Satan matters. But the disciples' relationship to God matters more. And the danger of focusing on the adversary, of making the enemy the center of the story, is a danger Jesus names with a single sentence. Do not make his fall your joy. Make your belonging your joy. This is a tension that runs through everything the tradition built around Lucifer. The story of the fallen morning star is powerful. It is illuminating. It explains things about the nature of pride, and the nature of evil, and the nature of the choices that confront every creature given freedom. But it is not the main story. It is the shadow cast by the main story. The main story is not about the one who fell. It is about the one who came to find the ones who were falling. But the image Jesus uses, falling like lightning, is too vivid to leave without examining. Lightning is the fastest visible thing in the ancient world. There is no trajectory, no arc, no slow descent that gives you time to watch and understand what is happening. One moment, the sky is dark. The next moment, a bolt of light connects heaven and earth, and it is over before you can process it. That is how Jesus describes the fall. Not a gradual decline, not a slow corruption. A fall. The speed of it is important. It suggests that there is a point of no return. A moment after which the trajectory is fixed and the descent is inevitable. And it suggests that what looks like a long and complex story of cosmic evil is, from a certain altitude, a single event, a departure from heaven that happens so fast that the speed itself is part of the description. Lightning falls and light follows it. That is the paradox of the image. The brightest visible phenomenon in the natural world is also, in a fraction of a second, gone. The morning star that wanted to ascend fell instead, and it fell like the fastest, brightest, most violent light in the sky. What happened after the fall is where the New Testament focuses most of its attention on the adversary. The temptation in the wilderness, the possession of the man in the Gerasene country, the accusation of believers, the blinding of unbelievers, the opposition to the gospel in every city Paul visits. But one text gathers all of these threads and weaves them into a single, overwhelming vision. A woman clothed with the sun, a great red dragon, a war in heaven, and a voice crying out in triumph when the dragon is thrown down. That text is Revelation, and the scene it describes is the most cinematic moment in the entire Bible. We need to go there slowly. John was on the island of Patmos when the vision came. Patmos is a small island in the Aegean Sea, roughly 10 miles long and 6 miles wide. Rocky and spare and beautiful, in the way that places stripped of everything unnecessary are sometimes beautiful. John was there, the text says, because of the word of God and the testimony of Jesus, a polite way of saying he had been exiled. The Roman Empire under Domitian had developed an efficient method for dealing with people whose message threatened the social order. Remove them from the places where their message could spread. They put John on an island, and on that island, on the Lord's day, John received a vision that has been shaping the human imagination ever since. The book of Revelation is not a history. It is not a prediction in the sense that most people mean when they use that word. It is an apocalypse, a Greek word that means an unveiling, a pulling back of the curtain to show what is really happening behind the visible surface of events. The Roman Empire looked, from the outside, like the most powerful and permanent force in the world. Revelation pulls back the curtain and shows what Rome looks like from heaven's perspective. It shows the real war, the one beneath and behind and above the political and military wars that everyone can see. And at the center of that real war is a figure John introduces with the full force of apocalyptic imagery. A great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet and a crown of 12 stars on her head. She was pregnant and cried out in pain as she was about to give birth. The woman has been interpreted in many ways. She represents Israel, or the church, or Mary, or the people of God in its fullness across history. Whatever the precise identification, she represents something sacred, about to be threatened by something that wants to destroy it. Then another sign appeared in heaven, an enormous red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 crowns on its heads. Its tail swept a third of the stars out of the sky and flung them to the earth. The dragon stood in front of the woman who was about to give birth, so that it might devour her child the moment he was born. Stop there. A great red dragon, 7 heads, 10 horns, its tail sweeping a third of the stars from the sky, standing before a woman in labor, waiting to devour her child. The imagery is overwhelming in its violence and its scale. This is not a courtroom scene like Job. This is not a political taunt like Isaiah. This is cosmic warfare rendered in the most visceral possible terms. The dragon is enormous. It is red, the color of blood and violence. It has 7 heads, the number of completion in biblical numerology, suggesting something totalizing and absolute in its nature. And its tail alone, simply by moving, knocks a third of the stars from the sky. The child is born. He is caught up to God and to his throne. The woman flees into the wilderness, and then the scene shifts. Then war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back. War in heaven. The phrase lands like the opening of a door into something that has been sealed. All of the previous texts we have examined, Isaiah 14, Ezekiel 28, Job 1 and 2, Luke 10, they have all gestured toward a cosmic dimension of the adversary's story. They have suggested, with varying degrees of explicitness, that something happened in heaven, or near heaven, or in the presence of God, that resulted in the adversary's current opposition to the good of the creation. Revelation names it war, not a debate, not a defection, not a quiet withdrawal from the presence of God. A war. Michael, one of the archangels, and his angels on one side, the dragon and his angels on the other. A genuine conflict in the realm that was supposed to be beyond conflict, but it was not strong enough, and they lost their place in heaven. The great dragon was hurled down, that ancient serpent called the devil, or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. He was hurled to the earth, and his angels with him. Hurled down, not gently displaced, not peacefully removed. Hurled. The word carries force and finality and something that sounds almost like the decisiveness of a victory that refuses to be partial. And then, in verse 9, comes the sentence that ties together everything we have been tracing through 2,000 years of scripture and interpretation. The great dragon was hurled down, that ancient serpent called the devil, or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. The great dragon, that ancient serpent, called the devil, or Satan. 4 names in one sentence. The dragon of Revelation, the serpent of Genesis, the devil of the New Testament, Satan, the adversary, all of them gathered here, in this moment of defeat and expulsion, and identified as the same figure. This is the only place in the entire Bible where the text itself makes these identifications explicit. Readers and interpreters had been connecting these images for centuries before John wrote Revelation. But here, in John's vision, The connection is stated rather than implied. The ancient serpent that deceived Eve in the garden is the same dragon that stands before the woman in labor. The adversary that moved through Job's heavenly court is the same figure that wages war against Michael and the angels of heaven. A voice cries out when the dragon falls, "Now have come the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God, and the authority of his Messiah. For the accuser of our brothers and sisters, who accuses them before our God day and night, has been hurled down." The accuser of our brothers and sisters, day and night. The image from Job has not disappeared. The adversary who stood in God's heavenly court, raising objections about the quality of human devotion, who challenged Job's faithfulness, who asked, "Does he fear God for nothing?" That accuser is still present in Revelation's vision. He accuses day and night, constantly, relentlessly, before God, and he is hurled down. The voice continues, "They triumphed over him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. They did not love their lives so much as to shrink from death." The victory over the dragon is not won by a superior army. It is won by the blood of the Lamb, by testimony, by the willingness of ordinary human beings to hold to what they know to be true, even when holding to it costs them their lives. The war in heaven is won, in a way that reverses every expectation, by the ones who were supposed to be the weakest participants in the conflict. But the dragon's fall does not end his activity. The voice that announces his defeat also announces his danger. "But woe to the earth and the sea, because the devil has gone down to you. He is filled with fury, because he knows that his time is short." He knows his time is short. That phrase carries something unexpected. The dragon, hurled from heaven, knows something about his own situation. He knows he is losing. He knows the outcome is determined, and the knowledge of his own coming end does not quiet him. It enrages him. The fury that drives his activity in the world is not the confidence of a being who expects to win. It is the fury of a being who knows he has already lost and is determined to do as much damage as possible before the end arrives. This is one of the most theologically interesting things Revelation says about the adversary, and it is one of the things most often overlooked in popular treatments of the subject. Satan in Revelation is not presented as a genuine rival to God. He is not an equal and opposite force locked in a cosmic struggle whose outcome is uncertain. He is a defeated enemy, operating in the time between his defeat and his final judgment, doing damage because damage is all he has left, knowing that his time is short. The war in heaven is not a close contest. It ends with Michael's victory and the dragon's expulsion. What follows is a world where a defeated enemy still has enough power and enough rage to cause real suffering, but where the outcome of the larger war has already been determined. There is something both sobering and strangely comforting in that picture. Sobering because the woe to the earth and the sea is real. The dragon on earth, filled with fury and short on time, is dangerous. The suffering he causes is not trivial or symbolic. It is the suffering of actual people in actual circumstances being ground up by powers that are hostile to their flourishing. Comforting because the fury is not the fury of a winner. It is the fury of someone who has already lost and knows it. John wrote Revelation from an island. He wrote it for communities of Christians living under an empire that was killing their members and demanding their worship and doing everything in its power to convince them that the dragon, not the Lamb, was the one with ultimate authority. He wrote it to show them the truth behind the appearance. The dragon looks enormous. His tail sweeps stars from the sky. His 7 heads carry crowns. He has 10 horns. He commands an army of angels. And Michael threw him out of heaven. The most important question about the war in heaven is not when it happened. It is what it means for the ones living on the earth while the dragon roams it. Knowing his time is short, John's answer is in the voice that cried out when the dragon fell. They triumphed over him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, not by superior force, Not by strategic advantage, not by the kind of power the dragon was used to encountering and overcoming. By testimony, by the willingness to keep saying what is true when the dragon is doing everything in his power to make the truth sound like a losing proposition. That is what the war in heaven means for the people living beneath it. The dragon has been hurled down. He is filled with fury. His time is short, and the ones he is most furious at are the ones who know it. Something remarkable happened in the first few centuries of the Christian Church. Scattered across dozens of different texts, written in different languages, addressed to different audiences, in different centuries, under different political circumstances, were images: a serpent in a garden, an accuser in a heavenly court, a morning star falling over Babylon, a guardian cherub expelled from the mountain of God, a dragon hurled from heaven, a figure Jesus saw fall like lightning. None of these texts, read in isolation, told the same story. None of them were written by the same person. None of them were originally addressed to the same audience. And none of them were primarily about the figure who would eventually be called Lucifer. They were about Job's suffering, and a Babylonian king's pride, and a Phoenician city-state's arrogance, and a cosmic war that a man on an island saw in a vision. And yet, a group of extraordinary minds, reading all of these texts together, began to see a shape in them, not a conspiracy, not a hidden code, a pattern, the same pattern appearing again and again in different forms, in different centuries, in different literary genres, a being close to God, a being of great beauty or power or intelligence, a turning inward, a reaching past what was given toward what was not given, a fall. The church fathers did not invent Lucifer. They recognized him, or they believed they recognized him. And the work they did to articulate what they recognized is one of the most consequential acts of theological interpretation in Western history. The first major Christian thinker to read Isaiah 14 as referring to the fall of the devil rather than simply the fall of a Babylonian king was Origen. Writing in Alexandria in the early 3rd century of the Common Era, Origen was one of the most brilliant and controversial minds the early church produced. He was also one of the most prolific writers in the ancient world, producing thousands of pages of biblical commentary, theological treatise, and philosophical reflection. He read the Bible with an intensity and a creativity that produced insights no one had articulated before, and conclusions that the church would later, in some cases, decide had gone too far. On Isaiah 14, Origen was clear. The fallen morning star was not merely a Babylonian king. It was the devil. The language was too exalted, the imagery too cosmic, the fall too absolute to be contained within the biography of any human ruler. Something had fallen from heaven, something that had been in the presence of God and had chosen, through pride, to reach past its given nature toward a position it could not legitimately occupy. Origen connected this reading to Luke 10, to Jesus saying he saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. The connection felt natural, almost obvious. Once you had made it, the morning star of Isaiah falling from heaven, the Satan of Luke falling like lightning from heaven, the same event, described in two different texts, written centuries apart, now legible as a single moment in the history of the cosmos. Tertullian, writing in Carthage at roughly the same time as Origen, made a similar reading. In his work against the heretic Marcion, Tertullian argued that the devil had once been an angel, the highest of angels, who had fallen through envy of humanity. The connection between the fall of the morning star and the corruption of the serpent in the garden was, for Tertullian, not a difficult interpretive leap. The serpent was the devil. The devil was the fallen morning star. The morning star was the once glorious angel who had been closest to God and who had, in the moment of his greatest brightness, turned away. What Tertullian added to the picture was the motive of envy. The devil, in Tertullian's reading, looked at humanity and saw something he could not tolerate: the image of God, stamped onto creatures made from dirt, loved by the Creator in a way that exceeded what the devil believed he himself was receiving. And in that envy, something broke. The greatest systematic theologian of the patristic period, Augustine of Hippo, writing in the early 5th century, gave the developing picture of Lucifer its sharpest and most philosophically rigorous formulation. Augustine had spent years as a Manichaean before becoming a Christian, and the Manichaean system, which posited a genuine cosmic dualism between a good God and an evil power of equal standing, had impressed itself deeply on his thinking. When he became a Christian, he spent much of his intellectual energy working out a theology of evil that could account for the reality of evil in the world, without granting evil the kind of metaphysical status that Manichaeism gave it. His solution was what theologians call privation. Evil is not a thing. It is the absence of a thing. Specifically, it is the absence of good. A being becomes evil, not by acquiring evil as a substance, but by losing the good that it was supposed to have and be. Pride, for Augustine, is the primordial example of this process. Pride is not the desire for something evil. It is the perversion of a good desire. The love of excellence turned inward until it becomes the love of the self to the exclusion of everything else, including the God from whom the self received everything it has. Lucifer, in Augustine's reading, was the most excellent of created beings, the most intelligent, the most beautiful, the most capacious. And in that excellence, pride found its most perfect host. The creature who had the most to be grateful for was the creature most tempted to believe that what it had was its own, that its excellence was a property of itself rather than a gift from its Creator, that a being as extraordinary as it was owed submission to no one. Augustine's City of God, one of the great works of Western literature, is organized around the contrast between two loves and the two cities those loves produce. The city of God is built by the love of God carried to the point of contempt for the self. The city of man is built by the love of the self carried to the point of contempt for God. Lucifer, in this framework, is not just the first sinner. He is the founder and the patron of the city of man. He is the one whose love turned so completely inward that it became the model for every subsequent act of pride in human history. When Augustine looks at the Roman Empire, the greatest human political achievement of his time and place, he sees a Luciferian structure, not because every Roman was consciously rebelling against God, but because the love of glory and power and dominion that drove Rome was the same love that drove the morning star, curved inward on itself, building a city whose foundation was the self rather than the source. The city of man always builds toward heaven, 5 I wills in ascending order, and it always falls. Not because it is punished from outside, because pride, carried to its conclusion, undermines the very thing it is trying to build. Jerome, who gave the Western Church the word Lucifer in the Vulgate, also gave it something equally important: a systematic reading of how all the scattered images belong to the same story. In his commentaries on Isaiah and Ezekiel, Jerome drew together the morning star of Isaiah 14 and the guardian cherub of Ezekiel 28, and argued that they describe the same being before and after the fall. Before brilliant, beautiful, closest to God, given a position of extraordinary responsibility; after expelled, fallen, possessing only the memory of what it had been. The Catholic tradition that emerged from these interpretive decisions was careful about one thing that popular treatments of Lucifer often miss. The Church Fathers consistently taught that Lucifer was not a proper name in the way that Michael or Gabriel are proper names. It was a description of a state that was lost. The light-bearer who no longer bears light. The morning star who fell from its position of brightness. The name describes not what the being is, but what it was. the glory it abandoned, in the moment it chose itself over its creator. That nuance matters. It means that the tradition was never simply telling a story about a bad being with a bad name. It was telling a story about a good being that made the worst possible choice. A creature of extraordinary endowment that looked at everything it had been given and decided it was not enough. That the gift was less important than the giver's position. That brightness borrowed from the sun was unsatisfying compared to being the sun itself. The Church Fathers did not all agree on every detail of this picture. Origen was eventually condemned for some of his views. Augustine and Jerome differed on specific points. The precise nature of the fall, its timing, its mechanism, the number of beings involved. These questions were debated vigorously and were never fully resolved. But on the central picture they converged. A being of great excellence, a fall through pride, an expulsion from the presence of God, a consequent opposition to the good of the creation, expressed most directly in the corruption of the first human beings and the ongoing adversarial relationship with the people of God throughout history. That picture, assembled from Isaiah and Ezekiel and Job and Genesis and Luke and Revelation, refined by Origen and Tertullian and Augustine and Jerome, became the foundation of what the Western Church believed about the devil for the next 1,500 years. It was not assembled carelessly. It was assembled by people who read the texts with extraordinary care, who debated every point, who were trying to account for the full weight of what the biblical material seemed to be saying. The Bible gave the fragments. Tradition built the portrait. And the portrait it built was not a simple one. It was a portrait of a creature who was, in its original state, the most beautiful thing in the creation, whose fall was not a fall from wickedness to greater wickedness, whose fall was from light into darkness, from gift into refusal, from the highest position a created being could occupy to a condition defined entirely by what had been lost. The making of Lucifer took centuries. It required the labor of some of the finest minds the early church produced. And when it was finished, it had produced something that no single biblical text had quite managed to produce on its own. A character, fully formed, with a beginning, a middle, and an ongoing presence in the story of the world. And a name, Lucifer, the light-bearer who would not give back the light. There is a question underneath the story of Lucifer that almost nobody asks directly. Not who he was, not what he did, not how the tradition came to identify the morning star of Isaiah with the dragon of Revelation, with the serpent of Genesis. The question is why? Why pride? Of all the possible sins, of all the possible ways that a magnificent created being could have gone wrong, why did the tradition settle on pride as the sin that made the devil? Why not anger? Why not envy? Or lust? Or the desire for revenge? Why did the greatest theological minds in Western history look at the fall of the morning star and say, unanimously, that the name of what destroyed him was pride? The answer runs deeper than most people expect. And it starts with the 5 sentences in Isaiah 14 that we have already visited, but need to visit again, more slowly this time. The king of Babylon speaks 5 times. Each time, he uses the same construction. I will ascend to the heavens. I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will sit enthroned on the Mount of Assembly. On the utmost heights of Mount Zaphon, I will ascend above the tops of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. 5 declarations, 5 future tenses, 5 expressions of a will that is entirely focused on its own elevation. There is nothing in these 5 sentences about other people. Nothing about what the king wants to give or build or protect or create. Nothing about the people under his rule, or the gods he is supposed to serve, or the responsibilities he has been given. 5 sentences entirely about where the self intends to go and what the self intends to become. That is the anatomy of pride. Not the desire for something evil. the complete orientation of desire toward the self. Augustine saw this with extraordinary precision. Pride, he argued, is not primarily about wanting what is wrong. It is about wanting what is good in the wrong way. The king of Babylon did not want something worthless. He wanted the highest position in the universe. He wanted proximity to the Most High. He wanted to be like God. These are not, in themselves, contemptible desires. The tradition teaches that human beings were made to know God, to be near to God, to reflect the image of God. There is nothing wrong with wanting closeness to the source of all goodness. What is wrong is the 5 I wills. The problem is not the destination. The problem is the engine driving toward it. Self-will, self-direction, self-elevation. The assumption that the self can and should secure its own ascent by its own power toward its own vision of its own glory. In the tradition's understanding, the tragedy of Lucifer is not that he wanted to be magnificent. He was magnificent, more magnificent than anything else in the creation. The tragedy is that he looked at his own magnificence and said, "This is mine. This belongs to me. This beauty, this intelligence, this proximity to God, this position of honor, this light I carry. It is not a gift. It is a property, and a being of this magnitude deserves to answer to no one." The moment that thought took hold, something broke. Not from outside, from inside, because the thought was wrong in a way that made everything built on it unstable. The light Lucifer carried was not his own light. He was the morning star, the light-bearer, the one who reflected the sun. The moment he began to believe that the brightness was his own, he had already begun to fall, because the brightness was not his own. A creature cannot generate what only a creator can generate. A finite being cannot make itself infinite by willing it. A borrowed light cannot become a source by pretending the borrowing never happened. The 5 I wills are not just arrogant. They are delusional. They describe a project that cannot succeed, not because God will not allow it, but because the nature of the thing being attempted makes it impossible. You cannot make yourself like the Most High by willing it. The Most High is the Most High because of what the Most High is, not because of where the Most High sits. The position cannot be occupied by something that lacks the nature it requires. Pride, in the tradition's fullest understanding, is not just a moral failure. It is a cognitive failure. It is the failure to accurately perceive what you are, where your gifts come from, and what the relationship between the creature and the Creator actually is. Lucifer, in the moment of his pride, did not simply make a wrong choice. He believed something false. He believed that what he had was his. He believed that the distance between himself and the Most High was a distance he could close by climbing. He believed that his own will was sufficient to make him what only God can make a creature be. And he acted on what he believed. This is why Augustine kept returning to pride as the foundational sin. The sin beneath all other sins. The sin from which every other human failure ultimately derives. Before anyone ever told a lie, pride had already made truth seem expendable when it conflicted with the self's preferred narrative. Before anyone ever stole, pride had already decided that what belonged to others was less important than what the self wanted. Before anyone ever killed, pride had already made other people's lives less valuable than the self's own purposes. Pride is not one sin among many. It is the condition that makes sin possible. The self-orientation that, once established, makes every other wrong choice feel justified. And the morning star was the first. Which means that when human beings experience pride, the tradition is saying something specific about what they are experiencing. They are not experiencing something uniquely human. They are experiencing a temptation that predates humanity, a pattern that was established before the garden was planted, a pull toward self-orientation that is, in a sense, the oldest force in the universe after the love of God. There is something clarifying about this, and something deeply unsettling. clarifying because it names something that every honest person recognizes in themselves. The moment of looking at a gift and beginning to think of it as an entitlement. The moment of receiving praise and starting to believe that the praise is simply accurate, that you have always been this good, that the recognition is overdue rather than generous. The moment of standing in borrowed light and beginning to feel ownership of it. Most people know that moment. Most people have stood in it. The tradition is saying yes. You know that moment because it is the oldest moment, the one before all the other moments. The morning star felt it first and fell, and the fall left something in the creation that everything created after it has had to navigate. Unsettling because of the implication about beauty. The tradition's account of Lucifer's fall does not locate the trigger in weakness or poverty or deprivation. It locates it in abundance, in brightness, in being the most gifted, the most beautiful, the most favored of all created beings. The terror of Lucifer is not that he began ugly. He began as the most beautiful thing in creation. The terror is that beauty, intelligence, excellence, proximity to God. None of these things are a protection against pride. They may, in fact, be the conditions that make pride most dangerous. Because pride is the perversion of something good. And the more good there is to pervert, the more material pride has to work with. Every artist who has ever created something genuinely beautiful knows the danger that follows. The work is real. The talent is real. The recognition is real. And in the wake of all of that reality, something begins to whisper. This is yours. This came from you. You are not like other people. You see what others cannot see. You make what others cannot make. You deserve what others have not earned. Every leader who has ever built something genuinely significant knows the same danger. The organization is real. The achievement is real. The loyalty of the people who follow is real. And in the wake of all of that, something begins to insist. You made this. This exists because of you. Without you, there is nothing here. You are indispensable. You are the source. Every believer who has ever experienced genuine spiritual growth knows the danger from the other side. The faith is real. The change is real. The closeness to God is real. And in the wake of all of that, something begins to suggest you have arrived somewhere others have not. You understand things others miss. You are, perhaps, a little less in need of grace than you used to be. In each case, the same movement, something real, something genuinely good, and then the subtle, almost invisible rotation of that good thing until it is pointing at the self rather than at the source. The tradition calls that rotation pride, and it calls it the sin that made the devil because it is the sin that made the devil. The first sin, the sin from which all other sins derive their energy and their justification. Lucifer was the morning star. He was not the sun. He forgot the difference, and in forgetting the difference, he became the darkness. Most people picture Lucifer as a king, not a defeated one, a ruling one, sitting on a throne somewhere beneath the earth, commanding legions of demons, presiding over a domain of fire and suffering with the cold authority of a monarch who has made his peace with where he ended up. The Lord of Hell, the Prince of Darkness, terrible, yes, but terrible in the way that powerful things are terrible, a ruler in his own right, in his own place, doing what rulers do. That picture is almost the exact opposite of what the greatest medieval imagination produced. Dante Alighieri wrote the Divine Comedy in the early 1400s. It is one of the most ambitious literary projects in human history. A journey through hell, purgatory, and heaven, guided first by the Roman poet Virgil and then by Beatrice, the woman Dante loved. The Inferno, the first and most widely read section, descends through 9 circles of hell, each one reserved for a different category of sin. each one worse than the last, until the reader arrives at the bottom, at the very center of the earth, the deepest point in the universe, the furthest possible location from God. There is Lucifer, and what Dante shows you when you arrive there is not what anyone expects. He is enormous. From a distance, he looks like a great windmill seen through fog. As Dante and Virgil get closer, the scale becomes clearer. He is the largest created being who ever existed. A figure so vast that the giants Dante encountered in the circle above would be to Lucifer what a child is to a giant. The size is deliberate. Dante is using scale to make a point about what pride produces. The one who wanted to be the Most High has been reduced to the biggest prisoner in the universe. He is frozen. From the chest down, Lucifer is encased in a lake of ice. The ice is called Cocytus, and it is the coldest place in Dante's cosmos. Frozen, not by wind or by winter, but by the beating of Lucifer's own wings. 6 wings, enormous, leathery, bat-like. The parody of the seraph's 6 wings that Isaiah described around the throne of God. Lucifer beats them constantly, and the wind they generate freezes the ice that imprisons him, which causes him to beat his wings harder to try to escape, which freezes the ice more completely. He is his own jailer. He has 3 faces, 1 red, 1 black, 1 pale yellow, a parody of the Trinity. 3 faces where there should be 1. The unity of God, mocked by a grotesque multiplication. Each face has a mouth. Each mouth is chewing something. Dante looks closer. The 3 mouths are chewing 3 figures: Judas Iscariot, who betrayed Jesus, and Brutus and Cassius, who betrayed Julius Caesar, the greatest betrayers in history, being eternally chewed and crushed and never consumed, in the mouth of the greatest traitor in the universe. He is weeping, 6 eyes, 1 pair for each face, weeping constantly. The tears flow down over the chins and mix with the blood and saliva from the mouths chewing the 3 bodies. The image is almost unbearable in its ugliness. The being who was once the most beautiful in creation, who was called the morning star, the son of the dawn, is now a weeping, chewing, frozen grotesque at the bottom of the universe. Dante does not let you feel sorry for him, but he does let you understand him, because the key to Dante's Lucifer is not what he is now. It is what his current state reveals about what he always was. The frozen lake, the beating wings, the weeping eyes. These are not punishments imposed from outside. They are the logical conclusions of the choice Lucifer made. He chose himself over God. He is now, forever, with himself and nothing else. He chose to refuse the warmth of the divine presence. He is frozen. He beat his wings trying to ascend, and the beating of his wings is what keeps him down. The theology here is precise. In Dante's universe, hell is not primarily a place God sends people. It is a place that people create by the direction of their love. The souls in hell are there because of what they loved and how they loved it. And Lucifer, who loved himself above everything, is at the furthest possible remove from the God who is the source of all love. Not because God rejected him, because he rejected God, fully and finally, and with the complete determination of a will that has made its choice and will not unmake it. Dante's Lucifer cannot speak. He is too busy chewing, the greatest orator in creation. If Milton had it right, the one who could persuade 1/3 of the angels to follow him out of heaven, is now mute. His wings beat, his mouths chew, his eyes weep, and he produces nothing but cold. It is worth pausing on that image because it is so different from what popular culture has made of Lucifer. The medieval imagination, the imagination that produced Dante and 1,000 years of theology and art and liturgy before him, did not find Lucifer glamorous. It did not find him sympathetic. It did not see in him a rebel worth admiring or a prisoner worth pitying. It saw the logical endpoint of a choice. A creature who wanted to be everything and became, in the fullest sense of the word, nothing. Not annihilated, existing, but existing in a condition defined entirely by the absence of the one thing that makes existence worthwhile. The medieval church did not only have Dante's literary vision of hell, it had centuries of theological reflection on what the tradition called the state of the damned. And at the center of that reflection was always Lucifer. The art of the medieval period depicts him in ways that range from the grotesque to the almost comic. A figure with fangs and claws and sometimes multiple faces. A deliberate desecration of the human form that the tradition used to make visible the desecration of the divine image that pride produces. He is not beautiful in medieval art. He is what happens to beauty when beauty turns away from its source. This was, in some ways, the most theologically serious period in the history of the Lucifer tradition. The medieval church was not entertaining itself with a dramatic villain. It was doing something harder. It was trying to show its people what evil actually is. Stripped of its glamour and its seductiveness and its rhetorical brilliance, reduced to its final form. And its final form was not a king on a throne. It was a prisoner in ice, chewing the same betrayers forever, weeping from 6 eyes, beating wings that freeze the lake that imprisons him. The medieval imagination understood something that later centuries would lose and then spend considerable effort to recover. Evil, taken to its conclusion, is not impressive. It is not glamorous. It is not a reasonable alternative to what God offers. It is cold and small and endlessly repetitive and entirely without the capacity to create anything new. Lucifer in Dante cannot create. He can only chew what he has already swallowed. He cannot warm anything. He can only freeze. He cannot build anything. He can only imprison himself more deeply in the prison his own choices built around him. Dante did not write Lucifer as a warning about what God does to the proud. He wrote him as a portrait of what pride does to itself. The prison is not the punishment. The prison is the pride, carried to its final address. But something was about to happen to this image that the medieval church could not have predicted and would not have approved. A poet in 17th century England was about to give Lucifer back his voice. And when Lucifer spoke again, after centuries of frozen silence, he would say things that millions of readers would find, almost against their will, difficult to argue with. John Milton was 58 years old, blind, and politically defeated when he began dictating Paradise Lost. He had spent the best years of his life in the service of the English Commonwealth, the Puritan Republic that had executed King Charles I and tried to build a godly state on English soil. Milton had believed in it completely. He had defended it in print, arguing for the right of a people to depose and execute a tyrant, writing pamphlets in Latin so that all of educated Europe could read the case for what England had done. He had worked himself nearly to blindness in the service of the Republic. And then the Republic collapsed. Charles II returned from exile. The monarchy was restored. The men who had signed the king's death warrant were hunted down. Milton, blind and no longer useful to anyone in power, was left largely alone. But the cause he had given his sight to was gone. In that condition, defeated and blind, he sat down with a young assistant and began to dictate the story of the greatest defeat in cosmic history. Paradise Lost is 12 books of epic poetry in the tradition of Homer and Virgil, telling the story from the war in heaven through the fall of Satan to the temptation and fall of Adam and Eve. It is one of the supreme achievements of English literature, and it created something that no previous treatment of the Lucifer story had quite managed to create. A Satan worth reading, not worth following, not worth admiring in any simple sense, but worth reading, which is a different and more complicated thing. A Satan whose speeches are so rhetorically powerful whose arguments are so well constructed, whose sense of his own situation is so vivid and so recognizable that readers across 3.5 centuries have found themselves leaning forward when he speaks, even when they know he is wrong. Paradise Lost opens not in heaven but in hell. Satan and his fallen angels have already lost the war. They are lying in the burning lake, defeated, unable to move, and the first thing Milton gives us is Satan lifting his head and speaking. His first speech is extraordinary. He looks around at hell, at the fire and the darkness and the fallen figures of his former companions, and he says something that sounds, if you are not careful, almost reasonable. The mind is its own place, and in itself can make a heaven of hell. A hell of heaven, what matter where, if I be still the same, and what I should be, all but less than he whom thunder hath made greater. Here at least we shall be free. The mind is its own place. This is not a foolish idea. It is a real idea. The capacity of the human mind to find meaning and resistance, and even joy in circumstances that seem designed to crush it, is a real capacity. One that the best of human history has demonstrated again and again. People in genuine prisons, in genuine darkness, have held on to themselves by holding on to the truth that something in them was not reducible to their circumstances. But Satan is not using this idea honestly. He is using it to avoid the one acknowledgement that would cost him everything and give him back everything. He is using the mind's freedom as a reason not to change his mind. He is using the real insight that circumstances do not determine identity as a cover for the false claim that his circumstances have not revealed something true about himself. Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. This is the line that Milton's Satan is most famous for. And it is the line that most clearly shows what Milton was doing. It sounds, on the surface, like a statement of dignity, the refusal to submit, the preference for autonomy over comfort, the choice of self-governance in a hard place over dependency in a pleasant one. But look at the logic underneath it. Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. The key word is reign. Satan does not want to exist freely. He wants to rule. The alternative he is rejecting is not slavery but service. Heaven, in his framing, is a place of servitude, and hell, however terrible, is a place where he can be in charge. What Milton is showing, with devastating precision, is that Satan has not learned anything from the fall. The fall happened because of the desire to reign, the desire to be at the top, the 5 I wills reaching toward the throne of the Most High. And here, at the bottom of the universe, looking up from the burning lake, Satan's first instinct is to figure out how to reign in hell rather than ask why the desire to reign destroyed him in the first place. He is still the same. He said so himself. He meant it as a statement of dignity. Milton meant it as a diagnosis. The speeches continue. Satan rallies his fallen companions. He delivers a military address that would not be out of place in the mouth of Churchill or Lincoln, full of resolution and pride and the determination to fight on, regardless of the cost. His followers respond. They begin to organize. They debate what to do next. And watching them debate, watching Satan volunteer to make the perilous journey through chaos to find and corrupt God's new creation, a reader can feel something that the medieval imagination would not have permitted. Something that feels almost like admiration. William Blake, a century after Milton, noticed this and said something that became one of the most famous observations in literary criticism. Milton was of the devil's party without knowing it. What Blake meant was that Milton, in giving Satan the best speeches, in making Satan's arguments the most compelling arguments, had accidentally made Satan the most interesting and most sympathetic character in the poem. Blake was not entirely right, but he was not entirely wrong either. Milton was a Puritan, a man of deep and serious faith, who believed that Satan was the enemy of God and humanity and everything worth valuing in the universe. He did not intend to make Satan sympathetic. He intended to show Satan's rhetoric for what it was: seductive, éloquent, internally coherent, and built on a foundation of complete self-deception. What Milton understood about pride, and what he poured into Satan's speeches, is that pride does not announce itself as pride. It announces itself as dignity, as freedom, as the refusal to be diminished, as the honest acknowledgement of one's own worth. Pride sounds like the most reasonable thing in the world from the inside, which is exactly why it is so dangerous. Satan in Paradise Lost is not a cartoon villain who knows he is wrong and does evil anyway. He is a being who has convinced himself that he is right, that God is a tyrant, that the war he fought was a war for freedom, that the fall was unjust, that hell is preferable to submission. He has built an entire architecture of self-justification around the central fact that he chose himself over God. And the architecture is so elaborate and so well constructed that even its builder cannot see through it to the choice at the center. That is a more terrifying portrait of evil than any medieval grotesque, not because it is more dramatic, because it is more recognizable. Every person who has ever constructed an elaborate justification for a choice they knew was wrong knows what Milton is describing. Every person who has ever used the language of dignity and freedom to avoid the language of repentance knows the voice Milton gives to Satan. Every person who has ever said, "I would rather be myself in difficult circumstances than less than myself in comfortable ones," and used that true statement to avoid a more important and more costly truth, knows the architecture Satan builds in the burning lake. Milton's Satan is not heroic. He is seductive. And the distinction matters enormously, because seductiveness is exactly what the tradition always said the adversary was. The father of lies does not announce himself as a liar. He announces himself as the one telling the truth that everyone else is afraid to say. He sounds like the honest voice in a room full of compromisers. He sounds like the one who sees clearly what everyone else is pretending not to see. He sounds like this because the best lies are built on real observations. Satan in Paradise Lost makes real observations about power and freedom and authority. He is not wrong that the universe is organized hierarchically. He is not wrong that the position he occupied was beneath the position he wanted. He is not wrong that his fall had consequences that are real and painful. What he is wrong about is the interpretation of all of it. He reads his own situation as injustice when it is consequence. He reads submission as humiliation when it is the condition of creaturely flourishing. He reads the God he refuses as a tyrant, when the God he refuses is the source of everything he was and had and could have been. The gap between what Satan sees and what is true is not a gap of information. It is a gap created and maintained by pride, by the unwillingness to follow a thought to its conclusion, if that conclusion requires acknowledging that the self was wrong. Paradise Lost gave the Lucifer tradition something it had not had since the Book of Job: a voice, a genuinely compelling, rhetorically sophisticated, humanly recognizable voice. And what that voice says sounds, at least at first and at least in part, like something you might have said yourself in a difficult moment. That is Milton's greatest achievement and his most dangerous gift to Western culture. He showed the world that the adversary does not look like the adversary. He looks like the most articulate person in the room. He sounds like he is right. And he is building his argument on a foundation that has been broken since the moment he said, in a burning lake at the bottom of the universe, that he would rather reign in hell than serve in heaven. The Romantic poets who came after Milton heard his Satan and heard something different than Milton intended. They heard a rebel, a hero of freedom, the one who said no to unjust authority and paid the price with dignity. And they took that reading and carried it into the 19th century, into the 20th century, into the culture that produced the world we live in now. And the world they produced is the world where Lucifer runs a nightclub in Los Angeles and helps the police solve murders. How we got from Milton's burning lake to that nightclub is a story about what happens when a tradition loses its grip on an image. And it begins with a generation of poets who were very good at hearing the wrong thing clearly. The year was 1818. A 19-year-old woman named Mary Shelley published a novel about a scientist who created a being from dead flesh and animated it with electricity, and then abandoned it because it was too ugly to look at. The creature, rejected by its creator and by every human being it encountered, eventually became violent. But before it became violent, it sat in a forest and read Paradise Lost, and it identified with Satan. Mary Shelley did not choose Paradise Lost accidentally. She chose it because by 1818, Milton's Satan had become the most powerful symbol available in English literature for a specific kind of experience. The experience of being gifted, created, given existence, and then rejected by the very power that brought you into being. The experience of having intelligence and feeling and the capacity for love, and being told by the world that you do not deserve any of it. Frankenstein's creature says, "I ought to be thy Adam, but I am rather the fallen angel, whom thou drivest from joy for no misdeed." For no misdeed. That is the romantic reading of Lucifer in a single phrase. He did not fall because of pride. He fell because God could not tolerate a being of his magnitude. He was punished not for something he did, but for something he was. His rebellion was not the source of his tragedy. It was his response to it. This is a complete inversion of what the tradition taught. And the Romantics arrived at it not by misreading Milton but by reading Milton very carefully and then choosing to believe that Satan's account of his own situation was more accurate than the narrator's. The Romantic poets were Byron, Shelley, Keats, Blake, and their circle, a generation of writers who came of age in the aftermath of two revolutions, the American and the French, and who had grown up believing that the old orders, monarchies and churches and the aristocracies that sustained both, were the enemies of human freedom and human dignity. They were not wrong about a great deal of what those institutions had done. The church had burned heretics. The monarchy had executed poets. The aristocracy had kept generations of human beings in poverty and called it the natural order. Into that historical moment, Milton's Satan walked with his burning eyes and his magnificent speeches and his refusal to submit, and the Romantics saw themselves. Lord Byron wrote a dramatic poem called Cain in 1821. The Lucifer in Byron's poem is a teacher, a philosopher, the one who offers Cain what God has withheld: knowledge of the universe, honest answers to honest questions, the truth about death and suffering, and the apparent arbitrariness of divine favor. Byron's Lucifer is not evil. He is educated. He is the one in the universe willing to tell Cain what God apparently does not want him to know. Percy Shelley went further. He wrote in the preface to his poem Prometheus Unbound that the character of Satan in Paradise Lost presents the most perfect specimens of heroic virtue. He argued that Milton's Satan was a moral being, far superior to his God because Satan at least was honest about what he wanted, while God, in Shelley's reading, demanded worship while hiding his motives behind claims of love. William Blake, whose reading of Milton as of the devil's party without knowing it we have already encountered, built an entire mythology around the idea that the God of conventional religion was himself a tyrant, while the true creative and liberating force in the universe was what Blake called energy and identified with Satan. These were not casual provocations. They were serious, sustained, philosophically developed arguments made by serious, sustained, philosophically serious writers, and they rested on a real observation about a real tension in the tradition. The tension is this: the tradition says that God gave creatures freedom, real freedom, freedom genuine enough to make real choices with real consequences. And then the tradition says that when a creature used that freedom to choose something other than God, the creature was expelled and punished forever. The Romantics looked at that picture and asked, is that freedom? Is a freedom that can only be exercised in one direction, toward God, or else result in eternal punishment? Genuinely free? Or is it a kind of divine coercion dressed in the language of love? Satan, in the Romantic reading, was the one who took freedom seriously, who tested it, who exercised it in the most radical way available to a created being, and who paid the price that God had set for using freedom in the wrong direction. The question underneath the romantic rehabilitation of Lucifer is a real theological question. It deserves a real theological answer. And the tradition has one. Beginning with Augustine's observation that freedom is not the capacity to choose anything at all without consequence. Freedom is the capacity to choose in accordance with what you actually are. A creature made for God is free to love God and free to refuse God. But refusing God does not produce freedom. It produces the condition Dante showed. Frozen, alone, chewing the same things forever. But the Romantics were not interested in Augustine. They were interested in Milton's Satan, and Milton's Satan was interested in reigning. Byron died at 36 fighting for Greek independence. Shelley drowned at 29. Keats died of tuberculosis at 25. They lived their beliefs with a consistency that their critics rarely matched, and their influence on Western culture, on the century and a half of art and literature and music and film and television that followed them, was enormous. The romantic Lucifer was not the frozen grotesque of Dante. He was not the seductive liar that Milton intended. He was a rebel, a genuine one, unjustly treated, fighting for something real against a power that demanded submission rather than love, a figure that every outsider, every misfit, every person who had been told by an institution that they did not belong and did not deserve, could look at and say, yes, that is my story. In America, that reading found particularly fertile ground. America was founded on rebellion, not just as a historical fact but as a mythological foundation. The story America tells itself begins with the refusal to submit to unjust authority. It begins with ordinary people saying to a king, "You do not own us. Your power over us is not legitimate. We are willing to fight and die for the right to govern ourselves." That story, that core American story, resonates with the romantic Lucifer in ways that are both obvious and uncomfortable. The rebel who refused to submit, the one who said, in the face of omnipotence, that he would rather face any consequence than bend the knee. The one who went down fighting rather than up by submitting. The American imagination has been drawn to that figure for 2 centuries, not because Americans are Satanists, but because the romantic Lucifer has the shape of the founding myth pressed into his story, and the founding myth is powerful, and the shape is seductive, and no one ever stopped to ask whether the comparison holds. It does not hold. The king that the American founders rebelled against was a human being with human limitations, human flaws, and human capacity for the abuse of power. The authority that Lucifer rebelled against, in the tradition's account, was not a tyrant. It was the source of his existence, his beauty, his intelligence, and his freedom. Rebelling against it was not the assertion of a legitimate freedom. It was the creature attempting to unmake the relationship that made it a creature at all. But the romantic reading did not ask that question. It took the shape, the rebel against authority, and pressed it onto the Lucifer story, and found that it fit well enough to be compelling. And compelling is what it has remained. Every generation since the Romantics has produced its own version of the romantic Lucifer. The tragic misfit, the brilliant outsider, the one who saw too clearly and paid the price for it, the one who refused to diminish himself to fit inside the space that the powerful had allocated for him. In the 20th century, that figure moved from poetry into music and film and television. He showed up in blues music, where Robert Johnson allegedly sold his soul at a crossroads and became the greatest guitarist anyone had heard. He showed up in rock and roll, where the energy and the rebellion and the sexuality that polite society wanted to contain found an image in the adversary who had refused containment. He showed up in heavy metal, where the imagery became explicit and theatrical. He showed up in horror films, where he was terrifying, and in literary fiction, where he was tragic, and eventually in network television, where he was charming and funny and had excellent taste in music. The Rolling Stones asked for sympathy for the devil in 1968 and received it from a generation that was watching the church support unjust wars and the state murder civil rights workers and the institutions of respectable society protect themselves at the expense of the vulnerable. The sympathy made a kind of emotional sense. Sympathy is not the same as accuracy. The romantic Lucifer is compelling because he is built on real observations. There is such a thing as unjust authority. There is such a thing as institutions that demand submission while abusing the people who submit. There is such a thing as the outsider who sees more clearly than the insider because the outsider has nothing to protect. But the tradition's Lucifer is not rebelling against unjust authority. He is refusing the condition of creaturely existence itself. He is refusing to be the morning star because he wants to be the sun. And the difference between those two refusals is the difference between a hero and a tragedy. The Romantics gave the Western world a Lucifer it wanted. Brilliant, misunderstood, dignified in his fall, defiant in his exile. What they could not give him, what no amount of poetic genius could supply, was a cause worth fighting for. He wanted to reign. That was all he ever wanted. And the whole tradition, from Isaiah to Ezekiel to Dante to Milton, exists to show what that wanting, pursued to its conclusion, actually produces. Not a king on a throne, not a rebel with a cause, a morning star that forgot the sun. In 2016, a television network aired a show called Lucifer. The premise was simple. Lucifer, morning star, bored with ruling hell, takes a vacation to Los Angeles. He opens a nightclub called Lux. He starts consulting for the LAPD, helping a detective named Chloe Decker solve murders. He is charming, witty, devastatingly handsome, and possessed of a supernatural ability to make people confess what they truly desire. He has a therapist. He has an English accent. He genuinely likes humans. He is, in almost every meaningful sense, a good person. The show runs for 6 seasons. It is enormously popular. It generates devoted fan communities, extensive online discussion, and genuine emotional investment from millions of viewers who find in this version of Lucifer something they want to spend time with. The finale airs in 2021 and trends globally on social media. This is worth sitting with, not to mock it, not to dismiss the people who watched it, but to ask, honestly, what the popularity of that show tells us about the moment we are living in and the needs it is expressing. Because something is being expressed. The Lucifer of that television show is not the Lucifer of the Bible. He is not the Lucifer of the Church Fathers. He is not the Lucifer of Dante, frozen and weeping at the center of the earth. He is not even the Lucifer of Milton, seductive but finally tragic, building his arguments on a broken foundation. He is a Lucifer who has been, in the most complete sense, rehabilitated, redeemed, given a backstory that makes his fall understandable, given relationships that make him sympathetic, given a character arc that suggests he was never really the problem, and millions of people loved him for it. Why? The answer requires honesty about the cultural moment that produced the show and the cultural moment we are still living in. We are living in a period of profound institutional distrust. The church, in many of its expressions, has been caught abusing the people it was supposed to protect. Governments have demonstrably lied to their citizens about wars and about justice and about whose lives count as losses worth mourning. The gap between what institutions claim and what they do has never been more visible, or more documented, or more impossible to deny. In that environment, the figure who refused to submit to authority, who said better to reign in hell than serve in heaven, who was cast out for asserting his own dignity rather than accepting the role assigned to him. That figure resonates, not because people have thought carefully about the theology, but because the emotional shape of his story matches the emotional shape of a great deal of lived experience in the 21st century. I was told to trust the institution. The institution failed me. I was told that submission was virtue. The ones who preach submission did not practice it. I was told that God is love and his representatives are his servants, and his representatives protected themselves. If that is your experience, and for many people, it genuinely is, then a Lucifer, who was unjustly treated by an authority that called itself good, has an obvious emotional appeal. He is the one who knew what the institution was before everyone else admitted it. He is the one who refused. He is the one who paid the price for seeing clearly. The television show does not ask you to worship the devil. It asks you to spend time with a character who has been wronged and who is trying to figure out who he is outside the role that was forced on him. That is a universally recognizable human experience. And the show tells it with enough charm and humor and genuine emotional intelligence that the theological questions it raises mostly slip past unexamined. This is what good storytelling does. It makes you care about the character before you think about the implications of the character's premise. And by the time you are thinking about the implications, you already love the character. And love has a way of making implications feel less urgent. Every generation produces the Lucifer it needs. The medieval church needed Dante's frozen grotesque because it needed to show people that pride leads nowhere worth going. The Romantics needed the heroic rebel because they needed to name the genuine tyrannies of their moment and find a figure who refused them. The 21st century needs the misunderstood charmer because it needs to process its experience of institutions that claim to represent God while doing damage in his name. All of those needs are real, and none of those needs is fully satisfied by the version of Lucifer produced to meet it. The medieval frozen grotesque does not help someone who has been genuinely abused by a church that used the language of submission to protect its abusers. The romantic rebel does not help someone who has confused the refusal of creaturely limits with the assertion of genuine dignity. The charming television character does not help someone trying to understand where evil actually comes from and why it looks so little like what they expected. What all of these versions share is a Lucifer who has been made manageable, contained within a human-sized story, given motivations and relationships and character arcs that make him comprehensible within the framework of ordinary human psychology. The tradition's Lucifer is not manageable. He is the being whose choice to refuse God sets something in motion that every human being born into the world has had to navigate. He is not sympathetic in the way that good television characters are sympathetic. He is explicable in the way that the deepest and most consequential choices are explicable. You can understand the logic. You can trace the steps. You can see exactly how a being of that magnitude, in that position, with that much to be proud of, arrived at that choice. And understanding the logic does not make the choice less catastrophic. The tradition does not ask you to fear Lucifer in the way that horror movies ask you to fear him. It asks you to recognize the movement he represents, the inward turn, the rotation of good gifts toward the self, the moment when borrowed light begins to believe it is its own source. That movement does not announce itself as evil. It announces itself as self-knowledge, as dignity, as the finally honest acknowledgement of your own worth. The morning star shines brightest just before the sun rises. It is easy to mistake for the sun. That is not a reason to distrust brightness. It is a reason to know where brightness comes from. Go back to Babylon. Not the ruins, not the archaeological site. Go back to the city at its height, to the walls and the gates and the ziggurat rising toward the sky, to the administrative buildings and the temples and the markets and the hundreds of thousands of people living their lives inside the most powerful city in the ancient world. Go back to the king. He is standing on the roof of his palace. It is evening, or perhaps just afternoon, and the city is spread out below him in every direction. And it is genuinely magnificent. The canals catching the light, the Ishtar Gate visible in the distance, blue and gold, the ziggurat dominating the skyline, everything he has built or expanded or improved or administered, everything that carries, in some sense, the imprint of his decisions and his will and his capacity to organize human effort at a scale that no previous ruler had quite managed. He looks at all of it, and something rises in him that feels, from the inside, like gratitude. But it is not gratitude. It is the thing that looks like gratitude and feels like gratitude and uses some of gratitude's language, but points in precisely the opposite direction. Is not this great Babylon, which I have built by my mighty power as a royal residence and for the glory of my majesty? By my mighty power, for the glory of my majesty. He said it while the words were still in his mouth. The voice from heaven fell before the sentence was finished. That detail, which appears in Daniel 4, is one of the most precise descriptions in all of Scripture of how pride works in time. It does not wait for the thought to be fully articulated. It does not require a complete philosophical position to be worked out. It rises in the moment of looking at something real and good and accomplished, in the moment of genuine achievement, and it makes the smallest possible rotation. From this is good to I made this. From this exists to I am the reason it exists. From gratitude to ownership. In a single breath, before the sentence is even finished. We have followed this pattern across 25 centuries of texts and traditions and imaginings. We have watched it appear in the morning star of Isaiah, and the guardian cherub of Ezekiel, and the accuser in Job's heavenly court, and the dragon of Revelation, and the church fathers, and Dante, and Milton, and the Romantics, and the television show that gave Lucifer an English accent, and a nightclub in Los Angeles. The pattern does not change. Only the costume does. Here is what the pattern actually is. A being is given something. The giving is real. The gift is genuine. The beauty is real beauty. The intelligence is real intelligence. The position is a real position. Not a pretend one. Not a nominal honor, but actual proximity to the source of everything good in the universe. And then, at some point in the contemplation of that gift, something shifts. The creature stops looking through the gift at the one who gave it and starts looking at the gift itself. And in the looking, in the sustained attention to its own endowment, it begins to feel a kind of pressure. The pressure of magnitude, the pressure of being so much that it seems almost unfair to be accountable to anything. A being this bright should answer to no one. A mind this capacious should not be constrained. A will this powerful should not be directed. A beauty this extraordinary should not be subordinated. And the pressure builds into a claim, not a reasoned philosophical claim, not a carefully argued theological position, but something more immediate and more visceral, a felt entitlement, the sense that what I am justifies reaching past what I was given. That is the pattern. And the reason the story of Lucifer has lasted 25 centuries and crossed every cultural boundary and appeared in every medium available to human imagination is not that it is a dramatic story about a fascinating villain. It is that the pattern it describes is the oldest pattern available to any creature given genuine freedom. Every human civilization that has ever existed has lived this pattern at the collective level. Every great empire in history has had its moment on the roof. The moment of looking out over what has been built, what has been organized, what has been achieved, and feeling the subtle rotation from this is magnificent to I am magnificent. Rome had it. Britain had it. Every civilization that confused the privileges of its historical moment with the properties of its inherent nature has had it. And every one of them eventually heard something like the voice that fell on Nebuchadnezzar before he finished his sentence. The pattern is not only collective, it is personal. The researcher who spent years doing careful, honest work building a reputation for rigor and humility, who one day begins protecting the reputation rather than doing the work. The moment the work becomes instrumental to the reputation, rather than the reputation being a byproduct of the work. The parent who built a family with genuine love and genuine sacrifice, who one day realizes that what they are defending is not the flourishing of their children, but the particular version of themselves that successful parenting has produced. When the children become occasions for the self, rather than the self becoming an instrument for the children. The pastor who entered ministry with genuine calling and genuine care, who somewhere in the accumulation of influence and platform and the experience of being needed, began to confuse the flock's dependence with personal indispensability. When the ministry became a mirror rather than a window, the artist who began making things because something in the world needed to be made and they were the one who could make it, who ended up making things because the making of things had produced a self that required maintaining. When the work started serving the artist rather than the artist serving the work. In each case, the same rotation. Something real. Something genuinely good. And then the almost imperceptible turn of that good thing toward the self. Until the self has become the center of a gravity that was never supposed to have the self at its center. The tradition calls this Luciferian. Not as an accusation. As a recognition. The name Lucifer, the light-bearer, the morning star, the one who reflected the brightness of the sun and forgot he was reflecting it, is the tradition's way of naming a dynamic that is available to every creature that has been given something worth having. The more you have been given, the more dangerous the rotation is, because the more material pride has to work with, the more genuine the gifts, the more convincing the case for ownership feels. The more real the achievement, the more natural the claim to deserve it. This is why the tradition did not locate Lucifer's fall in weakness or poverty or deprivation. It located it in abundance, in brightness, in being the most endowed of all created beings, because the story it was trying to tell was not a story about the poor and the desperate reaching for something they cannot have. It was a story about the rich and the magnificent reaching for something they already had, and losing everything in the reaching because the reaching itself was the betrayal of the having. You were the morning star. You had what the morning star has, and the morning star has something extraordinary. The first light in the darkness, the herald of the coming day, the brightness that tells everyone who is awake before sunrise that the night is ending, the position of announcing something greater than yourself, which is, in the tradition's account, one of the highest things a creature can do, to point, consistently, away from yourself and toward the source. That was enough. It was always enough. And the 5 I wills are, each of them, a version of the same sentence. It is not enough. The story of Lucifer survives not because it resolves the question of evil. It does not resolve it. The existence of a cosmic adversary does not explain why children suffer, or why the innocent are destroyed, or why the structures of the world seem so reliably to grind down the vulnerable in service of the powerful. The tradition is honest about this. Job asked the question and received not an answer but an encounter. The dragon is thrown down, but the earth still bears the woe. The story survives because it names something. It gives a shape to a dynamic that every person who has tried to live honestly has encountered, in themselves and in the structures around them. The inward turn, the rotation of gift towards self, the moment when light stops pointing away from itself and starts admiring its own brightness. And naming it is not nothing. Naming it is, in fact, quite a lot. Because the thing about the pattern, the Luciferian rotation, is that it is almost invisible in the moment. It does not announce itself. It does not arrive with horns and fire and the explicit claim that it is choosing darkness over light. It arrives as the most natural feeling in the world, as the honest acknowledgement of your own worth, as the reasonable response to being as gifted as you are. The story of Lucifer exists to make that arrival visible, to give it a name, to show what it looks like across the full arc of its consequences, not just in the moment of the feeling, but in the frozen lake at the bottom of the universe, and in Nebuchadnezzar's field, and in the empty ruins of Babylon that a traveler can visit today in modern Iraq, walking through foundations that were once the center of everything, underneath a sky that does not remember what all the confidence was about. Every empire sees itself in Isaiah's king of Babylon. Every age recognizes the 5 I wills. Every person who has been given something genuinely good knows the rotation. The fall that Lucifer represents is not inevitable. If it were inevitable, the tradition would not have spent 25 centuries describing it. You only describe in that much detail a thing that can be avoided, a thing that people can see coming if they are shown what to look for. This is what to look for. The moment when the gift starts feeling like a property, the moment when the brightness starts feeling like it belongs to you, the moment when the 5 I wills begin to feel less like ambition and more like accuracy. That is the moment. That is the one the tradition has been pointing to, from Isaiah to Augustine to Dante to Milton, to every honest conversation anyone has ever had about what went wrong and when. Not the fall itself, the moment just before it. The morning star at its brightest, just before the sun rises, mistaken for the sun itself, shining, forgetting, reaching. Every clear morning, if you are awake early enough, you can still see it. The same star, the same planet, really, Venus, reflecting sunlight, appearing in the eastern sky before anything else is visible, brighter than anything else up there, bright enough to cast the faintest shadow on a white surface if the conditions are right. The ancients stopped and looked at it. They named it. They wrote about it. They built it into their theologies and their mythologies and their poetry and their fear. The Greeks called it phosphorus. The Romans called it Lucifer. The Hebrews called it the son of the dawn. And a translator in the late 300s named Jerome wrote that Latin word, Lucifer, into a verse of Isaiah, into a poem about a dead Babylonian king, and set in motion a 2,000-year conversation that has produced some of the greatest theological writing and some of the most spectacular artistic imagery, and some of the most popular television in the history of Western race, civilization. All from one word, all from one image, a light that appears before the sun. The story we have followed across these chapters is not the story most people think they know. It is the story of scattered images. A serpent in a garden, an accuser in a heavenly court, a morning star falling over Babylon, a guardian cherub expelled from the mountain of God, a dragon hurled from heaven, slowly gathered across centuries of reading and interpretation and theological pressure and genuine suffering into a single portrait. The portrait is of a being who was, in the tradition's account, more than we can easily imagine, a creature of genuine proximity to God, genuine beauty, genuine intelligence, genuine endowment, a creature given the highest position available to a created being, given more light to carry than any other carrier, and a creature who, in the contemplation of all of that, made the oldest mistake available to anything that has been given something worth having. It looked at the light and said, "This is mine. Now here is the thing that the tradition placed in plain sight, in a location so obvious that most people walk past it without stopping. The last book of the Bible, in its second-to-last chapter, records words attributed to Jesus, and among those words is a description of himself. I am the root and the offspring of David, and the bright morning star. The bright morning star. The same image, the same words. The image used in Isaiah 14 of the one who fell. The image used in Revelation 22 of the one who overcame. 2 morning stars, 2 bearers of light, 2 beings for whom the image of the dawn star was chosen by the text. The difference between them is not a difference of brightness. It is not a difference of beauty or intelligence or proximity to God. Both are described in terms of light. Both are described as the star that appears before the full glory arrives. The difference is what they did with the light. One looked at it and said, "This is mine." One said, "In the Garden of Gethsemane, kneeling in the dark with the knowledge of what the next day would bring, not my will but yours." That is the difference. The whole difference, the only difference that the tradition, across 25 centuries of working this out, was able to find. Not the amount of light, the direction of it. The morning star that became Lucifer turned the light inward. The morning star of Revelation poured it outward, all the way to the cross, all the way to the last person who needed it, all the way to the end of the story. One grasped, one gave. The morning star rises every morning. It shines with everything it has. And then the sun comes up, and the morning star does what morning stars do. It gives way, not because it was defeated, because that is what it was always for.